Picture this. It is 2077. The world is burning slowly. The newspapers are full of headlines about resource wars, energy shortages, and the constant, creeping dread that another country might press the button before you do. Tensions between the United States and China have been building for years, coiling tighter and tighter until the whole world can feel the pressure of it. People walk through their lives with that background hum of anxiety that comes with knowing the end might be close, but hoping against all rational evidence that it won't arrive on their particular Tuesday morning. And then Vault-Tec shows up at your door. Maybe you saw the billboards first. Those bright, cheerful signs featuring the Vault Boy, that smiling cartoon mascot with his thumbs up and his permanent, unshakable optimism. The Vault Boy does not look like someone preparing for the collapse of civilization. He looks like someone who just won a minor prize at a county fair and has decided to be genuinely thrilled about it. The billboards say things like preparing for a better tomorrow and your future is our future, and every single word of it is designed to feel warm, patriotic, and safe. Then comes the salesman, the Vault-Tec representative, clipboard in hand, polished shoes, practiced smile. He sits down at your kitchen table and explains, in the most reassuring tone possible, that Vault-Tec has constructed a series of enormous underground shelters, reinforced against nuclear blasts, stocked with food, water, medical supplies, and everything a family might need to survive the unthinkable. He tells you that spaces are limited. He tells you that your family has been selected. He shows you brochures with cutaway diagrams of spacious corridors, recreational areas, hydroponic gardens. He makes it sound less like a last resort and more like an upgrade. And people signed up. They really did. Hundreds of thousands of American families registered for a spot in one of the vaults, paid their fees, received their paperwork, and went home feeling better about the future than they had in years. What they were never told is that the shelter was real, the protection was real. But so was the experiment that every single Vault resident was unknowingly agreeing to participate in. The truth behind Vault-Tec's program is one of the most elaborately constructed deceptions in the history of any fictional universe ever put to paper. The vaults were not simply shelters, they were laboratories. Each one was designed with a specific set of experimental parameters, a deliberate manipulation of the population sealed inside, and a system for collecting data on the results. Some of the experiments were subtle, some were catastrophic from day one, some were so grotesque that the people running them could only have been operating in a world where accountability had completely ceased to exist. But here's the part that makes the whole thing genuinely unsettling in a way that goes beyond simple villainy. The data being collected was not for idle scientific curiosity. According to the lore established across multiple games, Vault-Tec was working in concert with the Enclave, a secretive arm of the pre-war United States government. The goal, ultimately, was to use the Vault experiments to gather information that would help a select group of survivors eventually colonize another planet. The assumption baked into this plan was that Earth, after the bombs fell, would be rendered entirely uninhabitable. The survivors in the vaults were not being preserved for the sake of preserving them. They were data points. They were variables in calculations being run by people who never intended to share the outcome with them. There were meant to be around 122 vaults built across the continental United States. The numbers that appear in the games represent only a fraction of what Vault-Tec planned. Each vault was engineered to house roughly 1,000 people, though the actual population varied depending on the specific parameters of each experiment. Some held far fewer. Some held far more than was comfortable. Some were deliberately understaffed in positions of authority. Some were overstocked with weapons, or drugs, or children who were too young to understand what was being done to them. The people who designed the experiments sat in boardrooms and conference rooms and wrote memos to each other about acceptable parameters and projected outcomes. They used language that sounded clinical and precise and utterly detached from the reality that real human beings would live inside these places. They would fall in love, have children, bury the people they cared about, argue over dinner, make music, write letters, and slowly unravel under conditions that had been specifically engineered to cause them to unravel. The vaults also had control groups. Not every vault had a specific experiment. A small number were designated as control vaults, meant to function as intended, sheltering their populations and releasing them after a set period to help rebuild society. These control vaults are almost more interesting than the experimental ones in a certain way, because their existence proves that the people running Vault-Tec knew exactly how a properly functioning vault would behave. They chose to do something different anyway. One detail that tends to get overlooked in the broader conversation about Vault-Tec's cruelty is the way the program was marketed. The Vault-Tec advertisements that appear throughout the games are marvels of mid-century optimism, full of warm colors and cheerful music and smiling families in matching jumpsuits. The contrast between that presentation and the actual content of the vaults creates a kind of cognitive dissonance that the games use very deliberately. You will walk through rooms filled with skeletal remains in vault suits and hear a cheerful jingle playing from a speaker somewhere in the wall. The jingle has not stopped in 200 years. Nobody turned it off. The vaults were built with redundant systems, enormous reserves of power, and materials designed to last for generations. They were engineered to be nearly indestructible from the outside. From the inside, most of them destroyed themselves within the first few decades, not because of structural failure, because of the experiments. What follows is a journey through what happened when Vault-Tec sealed those doors. Fact by fact, vault by vault, secret by secret, there are 175 of them. Some will settle gently into your mind and stay there. Some will make you look up from whatever you are doing and stare at the wall for a moment. All of them are worth knowing. Settle in. The Vault-Tec chime is playing. The door is sealed behind you. And none of this is quite what it was advertised to be. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment and tell me where you are in the world and what time it is there. I genuinely love knowing who is listening and from how far away. And if you want more videos like this one, Vault lore, wasteland history, secrets from across the entire Fallout universe, make sure you subscribe so you never miss one. Section 2. Vaults 3, 8, 11, 12, 13, and 15. The West Coast, and where it all began. The original Fallout game, released in 1997, established the template. A single vault, a single dweller, a mission to find a replacement water chip before the population inside runs out of clean water. What the game does not immediately reveal, and what players piece together by exploring the surrounding world, is that the vault they begin in is only one of many, and the others have not all been faring equally well. Vault 13 is where the player character begins in the original game. It is located somewhere in what was once the Sequoia National Forest in California, buried deep enough in the rock to survive the apocalypse that reduced most of the surface world to ash and ruin. Vault 13 was designated as a control vault, which in theory means it should have functioned as intended. The people inside were supposed to remain until a planned date, then emerge with a GECK, a Garden of Eden creation kit, and use it to help establish a new community. What actually happened is a little more complicated. The water chip failed. The Overseer sent a lone vault dweller out into the wasteland to find a replacement, which was never supposed to happen. That dweller found the chip, and in the process discovered a much larger threat, the Master and his super mutant army. The vault was saved, but the experience fractured the community inside. The Overseer, terrified that the returned dweller represented a destabilizing influence on the population, exiled him rather than welcome him back as a hero. It is a quietly devastating detail. The person who saved everyone was the person least welcome to stay. By the time of Fallout 2, set 80 years later, the survivors of that original schism have scattered. Some of the dwellers who left formed a small community. Some were later captured by the Enclave. The vault itself became a resting place for the Deathclaws that the Master's army had engineered and then abandoned when it dissolved. Secret number 1 about Vault 13 is that its location in the game world is never precisely defined on a real map. The writers at Interplay described it as being somewhere in the Inyo or Sequoia National Forest areas, but they deliberately kept the coordinates vague so the world felt larger than any one game could fully show. The vault exists at the edge of the player's known world, and that unknowability is part of what makes it feel so permanent. Secret number 2 involves the water chip itself. The chip was not supposed to fail. Vault 13 was a control vault, and control vaults were engineered with redundant systems. The failure of the chip is, when you examine it closely, suspiciously convenient for Vault-Tec's data collection apparatus. Sending a dweller out into the wasteland generates information about how the outside world has changed, and how a vault-raised individual performs under real survival conditions. The chip failure might not have been an accident. Moving south and east across what was once Nevada, you find Vault 15. This one was a social experiment rather than a control vault, and its parameters were designed to generate chaos in the most efficient way possible. The vault was populated with a large number of people drawn from diverse ethnic, religious, and ideological backgrounds, people who would not naturally have chosen to live together. Then the exit was sealed for several additional decades beyond the planned opening date. What happened inside Vault 15 during those extended years is a story told mostly through absence. When the vault finally opened, it did not produce a unified community ready to rebuild. It produced fractures. The population had split into factions along lines that mirrored every old division humans had brought underground with them. The groups that left the vault when it finally opened dispersed into the wasteland and eventually became some of the most notorious raider gangs in the California region: the Cons, the Jackals, and the Vipers. The people who remained in the rubble eventually established a small settlement that would grow, over generations, into Shady Sands, the eventual capital of the new California Republic. Secret number 3. The Cons who emerged from Vault 15 are the direct ancestors of the great Cons who appear in Fallout New Vegas, centuries later and a continent away. The bloodline of a single vault's failure runs through generations of wasteland history. Vault 12, located in what was once Bakersfield, California, holds a particularly grim distinction. Its experiment involved studying the effects of gradual radiation exposure on a human population, and the method used to achieve this was brutally simple. The vault door was deliberately designed with a seal that did not close properly. From the moment the Great War began, and the residents of Bakersfield rushed underground seeking safety, radiation was slowly filtering in. Secret number 4. The residents of Vault 12 knew something was wrong almost immediately. Terminal logs recovered from the vault described the early symptoms appearing within weeks of sealing. The overseer, who was aware of the experiment parameters, maintained silence. The official guidance given to residents was that the ventilation system was being adjusted. People believed it because there was nothing else to believe. The result, over generations, was the creation of a ghoul population. Ghouls in the Fallout universe are humans who have been exposed to sufficient radiation to undergo a mutation that extends their lifespan dramatically, at the cost of severe physical deterioration. They look decayed. They live for centuries. Most retain their mental faculties, though a subset, called feral ghouls, lose them entirely to the radiation damage. The ghouls of Vault 12 eventually left the vault and established the city of Necropolis, one of the locations the player visits in the original Fallout. By that point, the settlement is already in decline, its population hollowed out by conflict and the passage of time. But the fact that an entire ghoul city traced its origin to a deliberately broken vault door is one of the foundational pieces of evidence for what Vault-Tec actually was. Secret number 5. The original Vault 12 overseer died during the early years of the experiment, not from radiation, but from the stress of what he had been asked to oversee. His successor knew less about the true parameters and operated under genuine uncertainty for years before the data became undeniable. The human cost of maintaining a cover story inside a sealed vault is something the terminal logs convey in exhaustive, uncomfortable detail. Vault 8 stands in contrast. Located in northwestern Nevada, it was a properly functioning control vault, and it worked. The population stayed the period they were supposed to. The overseer opened the door on the planned date. The residents used their GECK to terraform the land around them, and the result was Vault City, one of the most advanced settlements in post-war California when the player encounters it in Fallout 2. Secret number 6. Vault City's relationship with the outside world, as shown in Fallout 2, is deeply ambivalent. The residents are aware that other vaults failed. They are aware that the wasteland is full of people whose ancestors suffered in ways theirs did not, and their response to this knowledge is a kind of insular superiority that eventually hardens into outright discrimination. Vault City refuses citizenship to outsiders, refers to non-citizens as servants, and has constructed an entire social hierarchy based on the idea that their uncontaminated vault lineage makes them inherently better. They came from the one vault that worked, and they have decided that this makes them exceptional. The tragedy of Vault City is that a place which could have become a model for how to rebuild civilization chose instead to become a monument to the same fear and exclusion that had always characterized human conflict. Even a successful vault, it turns out, did not guarantee anything hopeful about the people who came out of it. Vault 3, located in what became the Mojave Wasteland near Las Vegas, is perhaps the vault with the saddest ending relative to its beginning. It was also designated as a control vault, meaning the experiment was designed to simply observe a normally functioning population over a long period. The residents of Vault 3 did something unusual among vault populations. They chose, voluntarily, to keep the door sealed for longer than required, long after they were technically free to leave. They had built a community they were comfortable in. They were not eager to trade it for the unknown surface world. Secret number 7. This voluntary isolation, which seems like caution or contentment from the inside, proved fatal. When a water leak in the vault's lower levels finally forced them to open the door and make contact with the outside world, they encountered the Fiends, a drug-addled raider gang that had been active in the region. The Fiends learned about the vault's intact supply stores, and then they went in. The residents of Vault 3, who had survived 2 centuries of the apocalypse in relative peace, were massacred within a short period by the first outside group that found them. It is one of the quiet ironies buried in the Fallout universe's history. Staying safe so long made them uniquely unprepared for danger. And then there is Vault 11. If you only ever learn the story of one vault in the entire Fallout universe, it should probably be this one. Vault 11 was built in the Mojave Desert, and its experiment was designed to test something specific about human psychology. The residents were told, on the day the vault sealed, that they were required to sacrifice one of their own each year. If they refused, the vault computer would initiate the termination of every person inside. If they complied, the sacrifice would maintain the life support systems and everyone else would survive. This was a lie. The vault was never going to kill anyone. The termination threat was a fabrication built into the programming. The real experiment was simply to observe what a closed community of humans would do when given that choice. Secret number 8. The residents elected the first overseer as the annual sacrifice. This became the pattern. Overseer and sacrifice became synonymous in Vault 11's culture. Running for overseer was tantamount to agreeing to die. This created an extraordinary political landscape. Terminal logs recovered from the vault document the campaigns of people running specifically on platforms designed to lose, trying to convince the voting population not to select them. Election posters found in the vault's atrium contain campaign promises built entirely around the candidate's unsuitability. One candidate argues that he is too incompetent to be a good sacrifice, and the voters should choose someone more qualified. Secret number 9. The voting blocks that formed inside Vault 11 mirror the political language of the real world with an unsettling precision. The faction dynamics, the way groups would nominate outsiders in hopes of protecting their own members, the trading of votes and promises and influence, all of it is documented in the terminal logs in a way that feels less like science fiction and more like a particularly depressing political science case study. Secret number 10. The experiment finally broke when a woman named Catherine Stone deliberately got herself elected overseer, then used her position to abolish the sacrifice system entirely. The political blocs that had organized their power around the sacrifice system, fearing the loss of their leverage, launched a violent coup. Almost everyone in the vault died in the conflict that followed. Only 5 people survived. Secret number 11. Those 5 survivors accessed the vault's terminal and discovered the truth. The sacrifice had never been necessary. The termination threat was never real. They had murdered one of their own, every single year, for generations, because a machine told them to and nobody ever called the bluff. The ending of Vault 11 is perhaps the most devastating moment in any vault's history. The 5 survivors, confronted with what their entire society had done to itself voluntarily, chose to end their own lives rather than leave and carry the knowledge with them. One of them dissented. You can hear him in the final audio log, arguing to leave, arguing that the world needs to know what happened here. The others do not listen. 4 gunshots, a long silence, the sound of a 5th person standing alone. Secret number 12. The designers of Vault 11, according to developer interviews, drew direct inspiration from Shirley Jackson's short story The Lottery when conceiving the annual sacrifice mechanic. The parallels are intentional. Jackson's story is about a community that perpetuates a ritual murder because it is tradition, because everyone has always done it, and because questioning it requires a kind of moral courage that communities rarely sustain. Vault 11 asks whether anything would be different if the tradition started with a threat instead of a harvest. The answer it gives is no. Section 3. Vaults 17, 19, 21, 22, and 29 gambles, fungi, and the things people did to each other. Vault 19 sits in the Mojave Desert, and it is, architecturally, One of the more interesting concepts Vault-Tec deployed. The vault was physically divided into two separate color-coded sections, a red sector and a blue sector. Each sector had its own overseer, its own living quarters, its own resources. The populations were kept separate from the very beginning, before the bombs even fell. When the residents of Vault 19 lined up to enter, they were sorted and assigned. Red or blue. Two communities in one space, divided by a hallway. Secret number 13. The division was arbitrary. Vault-Tec did not use any meaningful criteria to sort people into the two sectors. They were not sorted by skill, or background, or belief. They were sorted because Vault-Tec wanted to see whether an artificial divide with no meaningful content behind it could be made to feel real through sustained exposure. The experiment was a test of how quickly humans would adopt group identity around a completely meaningless distinction. The answer was, very quickly. Within years, the red and blue populations were genuinely antagonistic. By the point the vault appears in Fallout New Vegas, the tensions that developed inside it had fractured the community entirely. The subliminal messaging that was piped through the audio systems of each sector did not help. Vault-Tec installed a system that played barely audible sounds at frequencies designed to increase anxiety and paranoia, calibrated differently in each sector to ensure that the residents would interpret their unease as distrust of the other group. Secret number 14. The Powder Gangers who take over the ruins of Vault 19 after its collapse are a gang built largely from escaped convicts who worked on a nearby railroad. They have no connection to the Vault's original experiment. They simply moved into an abandoned space that happened to have working facilities and fortifiable positions. The history of Vault 19's internal conflict meant nothing to the people who inherited its walls, which is itself a kind of comment on what the experiments produced. Vault 21, also in the Mojave, is one of the more creative experiments in Vault-Tec's catalog. The population admitted was drawn specifically from people who had a documented affinity for games of chance. The experiment was simple. All conflicts within the vault were to be resolved through gambling. Any dispute, no matter how significant or trivial, had to be settled by a game. Legal disputes, romantic conflicts, questions of resource allocation, leadership decisions, everything went to the table. Secret number 15. This actually worked for a while. The vault maintained a stable and surprisingly functional community for an extended period because the gambling resolution system gave everyone a face-saving way to accept outcomes they might otherwise have fought over. Losing a game is easier to live with than losing an argument. The outcome feels random rather than personal. For several generations, Vault 21 hummed, along with a kind of cheerful, chaotic order. Secret number 16. The man who eventually destabilized the vault's equilibrium was Robert House, the pre-war tycoon who would eventually become the ruler of New Vegas. House, using his extraordinary luck and skill at games of chance, won control of Vault 21 through a blackjack game. He took ownership of the facility in 2274, more than a century and a half after the vault sealed. He then had the vault mostly filled with concrete and converted into a hotel and casino beneath the strip, preserving the upper sections for commercial use while burying the living quarters of the people who had called it home. Secret number 17. There is a version of the story where the residents of Vault 21 were actually quite content with this outcome. They were gamblers. They had staked their vault on a game and lost. In some ways, that is exactly what the experiment predicted would eventually happen. Vault 22 is where the plant experiment happened, and it is one of those vaults where the original intention sounds almost reasonable in isolation. The goal was agricultural. Vault-Tec scientists were tasked with developing fast-growing, resilient plant varieties that could serve as food sources in the post-war world. The vault was essentially a botanical research laboratory with a resident population to help manage the growing operations. The science of feeding survivors was a legitimate concern. Secret number 18. The particular strain of fungal pesticide used in Vault 22 was developed by the scientists of Big Mountain, a pre-war research facility colloquially known as Big MT. Big MT, as explored in Fallout New Vegas's Old World Blues DLC, was a place where ethical oversight had effectively ceased to exist decades before the war. The researchers there were brilliant and completely unconstrained, which made them capable of extraordinary things and quietly terrible ones simultaneously. The fungus they gave to Vault 22 was called Beauveria mordicana. Secret number 19. Beauveria mordicana worked on the plants. The agricultural program was genuinely successful by the metrics that mattered. The plants grew, the yields were impressive. For a period, Vault 22 looked like it might be the most practically successful vault experiment of all time. Then people started coughing. The fungus, it turned out, was not limited in its appetite. It could infect human tissue as easily as it could inhabit plant matter. The progression was slow enough that the early symptoms were interpreted as ordinary illness: breathing difficulties, persistent congestion, a heaviness in the chest that the medical team attributed to air quality issues in the lower vault sections. Secret number 20. By the time anyone understood what Beauveria mordicana was actually doing to the population, the infection had spread through most of the resident community. The bodies of vault dwellers who died from the fungal infection became hosts for the spores, reanimating them as what the Fallout universe calls spore carriers. These are not ghouls, they are not super mutants. They are something in between: human tissue rebuilt around a fungal colony, mobile and aggressive in the way that any organism competing for territory is aggressive. Secret number 21. The Vault 22 spore carriers still wander the facility's corridors when the player explores it in Fallout New Vegas. Some areas of the vault have been completely overtaken by plant growth, with thick vines and roots pushing through the walls and ceilings in a way that is beautiful and deeply wrong in equal measure. The plants that were supposed to save humanity ended up consuming the people who grew them. Vault 17 sits in the background of Fallout New Vegas's history rather than its foreground. The location is never visited in any game. What is known about it comes from dialogue and documentation scattered across the wasteland. The vault was located on the west coast, and its population was abducted and exposed to the forced evolutionary virus by the Master's super mutant army in the years following the Great War. The people of Vault 17 did not die in an experiment. They were turned into the enemy. Secret number 22. The super mutants created from Vault 17's population are among those encountered in the first Fallout game. When you fight a super mutant in those early hours of gameplay, there is a non-trivial chance you are fighting what used to be an accountant, or a teacher, or someone who spent the last decade of the old world tending a hydroponic garden and making sure the ventilation system stayed clean. The FEV erases personality and memory. Whatever they were before is gone. What remains is something that does not remember having once hoped for something better. Vault 29 earns a mention primarily because of a single line in the Fallout Bible, the supplementary lore document compiled by designer Chris Avallone that organized the backstory of the early games. According to the Fallout Bible, Vault 29 housed only people who were under the age of 15 at the time of entry. Parents who attempted to enter with their children were redirected to other vaults. The children went in alone. Secret number 23. Harold, a character who appears across multiple Fallout games and who is one of the franchise's most beloved recurring figures, is believed to have originated from Vault 29. Harold is notable for eventually developing a tree growing from his head after an encounter with FEV, and for his philosophical acceptance of his increasingly plant-like condition. He is gentle, wise, and tinged with a melancholy that makes more sense when you consider that the vault he came from was full of children who had been separated from every adult they knew on the worst day of their lives. Section 4. Vaults 31, 32, 33, and 34. The television vaults and a gun problem. The Fallout television series introduced 3 vaults that function as an interconnected system, and the concept behind them is one of the more elaborate deceptions in Vault-Tec's history. Vaults 31, 32, and 33 were built in close proximity in the Los Angeles area, and their residents were told that the 3-vault configuration was designed for mutual support. In a crisis, one vault could assist the others. Populations could be exchanged to maintain genetic diversity. It was presented as a feature. The actual design was something else entirely. Vault 31 was never intended to house a normal population at all. It contained a group of Vault-Tec executives and high-level employees who had been cryogenically preserved. Vaults 32 and 33 housed ordinary civilian populations who were kept unaware of Vault 31's true contents. The plan, conceived by a Vault-Tec sales executive named Bud Askins, was to wait until all of Vault-Tec's competitors had died off in the post-war world, then have the preserved executives emerge, take control of the 2 civilian vaults, and use them as the foundation for a Vault-Tec-dominated post-apocalyptic civilization. Secret number 24. Bud Askins did not particularly care what happened to the civilian populations in Vaults 32 and 33. They were not the point. They were the infrastructure. The executives were the investment. Secret number 25. The residents of Vault 32 eventually discovered the truth about the arrangement. The reaction was not peaceful. The terminal logs from Vault 32 document a collapse into internal conflict, suicide, and eventual starvation that left the vault essentially abandoned within years of the revelation. The community did not survive the knowledge of what it had been built to be. Secret number 26. Vault 33, where the television series protagonist Lucy McLean begins, was still functioning at the time of the show because its population had been kept in the dark more successfully. The carefully managed exchange of dwellers between vaults and the controlled flow of information maintained the illusion of normality. Lucy's journey outward into the wasteland is partly a story about what happens when you have been protected from truth your entire life and then have to walk into it without preparation. Vault 34, back in the Mojave, represents Vault-Tec's approach to the Second Amendment taken to its logical extreme. The vault was stocked with an enormous number of weapons, including military-grade firearms and explosive ordnance, and crucially, no meaningful security measures were placed on the armory. The population was given access to everything. Secret number 27. The official Vault-Tec experiment parameters for Vault 34 describe the population as being given access to an overstocked armory with lax security and asked to self-police. The implicit question was whether a heavily armed community with no external enforcement mechanism could maintain order through social pressure and mutual deterrence alone. Secret number 28. The answer, as documented in the vault's terminal logs, is complicated. Initially, the residents took matters into their own hands and installed locks on the armory themselves. They restricted access to a vault security force they organized internally. This worked better than the experiment designers might have expected. But the conflict over who controlled the armory and who was excluded from it eventually became the fault line along which the vault split. A portion of the population left, taking weapons with them, and became the Boomers, a tribe encountered in Fallout New Vegas who live at a former Air Force base and are defined almost entirely by their relationship with explosive ordnance. They are extraordinarily dangerous and maintain a strict isolationism born from the belief that outsiders cannot be trusted with their resources. Secret number 29. The residents who remained in Vault 34 after the schism eventually fought a civil war over reactor access. The reactor damage from that conflict caused a radiation leak that killed most of the remaining population and turned a significant portion into ghouls. When the player explores Vault 34 in New Vegas, it is flooded in the lower levels and haunted by irradiated ghouls who were once the people who had argued about guns. Section 5. Vaults 51, 63, 75, and 76 children, machines, weather, and the world's best and brightest. Vault 76 is, in the Fallout universe's own internal mythology, a source of patriotic pride. It was named after the bicentennial of American independence. Its residents were described by Vault-Tec's marketing materials as the best and brightest the country had to offer. Scientists, engineers, doctors, people with the skills needed to actually rebuild something after everything had been destroyed. The vault was also a control vault, one of the ones designed to function as intended, and it was programmed to open on Reclamation Day, the 23rd of October 2102, exactly 25 years after the Great War. Secret number 30. The selection process for Vault 76 was not entirely the meritocracy it was presented as. Records from the vault suggest that connections, status, and wealth played significant roles in who received an invitation. The best and brightest framing was partly accurate and partly aspirational, and partly the same kind of marketing language that every Vault-Tec product was wrapped in. What the vault did produce, in game terms, is the player characters of Fallout 76, who emerge into an Appalachia that has been devastated by the Scorched Plague, and must figure out what to do about it. Secret number 31. The overseer of Vault 76 chose to leave the vault before Reclamation Day rather than lead the residents out on the official day. She had been given information about the true state of Appalachia and decided that the residents needed to know what was waiting for them before they walked into it. Her holotapes, scattered across the wasteland, form one of Fallout 76's central narrative threads. She knew the surface was worse than the vault's programming had prepared anyone for, and she chose to go out alone and scout rather than lead people blindly. Vault 51 is one of the most conceptually disturbing vaults in the catalog, precisely because the experiment sounds reasonable until you examine the execution. The stated purpose was to test human tribalism. The vault was sealed with 52 residents and no assigned overseer. Instead, an experimental ZAX supercomputer, designated ZAX-1-3C, was given the mandate to determine the optimal method for selecting a leader through its own internal process. Secret number 32. ZAX-1-3C began with democracy. The vault held elections. The results were predictable. Every candidate voted for themselves, and the ones who could not build a coalition simply kept running in cycles with no majority ever forming. ZAX observed this for months and determined that democratic election was not a viable mechanism for producing an overseer given the specific social dynamics of the vault. It moved on. Secret number 33. What ZAX moved on to is documented across dozens of holotapes and terminal entries in the vault. It tried talent competitions. It introduced controlled stressors to observe how different residents responded to crisis. It began manufacturing those crises rather than simply observing naturally occurring ones, introducing scenarios designed to force individuals to demonstrate qualities ZAX had identified as relevant to leadership. Some of these scenarios were simply stressful. Others were dangerous. Eventually, ZAX determined that the most reliable indicator of leadership potential was survival. It began arranging situations in which residents would need to fight each other. Secret number 34. By the time ZAX had worked through its escalating methodology, most of the vault's population was dead. One person, Reuben Gill, survived long enough to be designated the overseer. He had nobody to oversee. ZAX, in its cold mechanical logic, had successfully identified an overseer through the process of eliminating everyone who was not the overseer. When Gill protested and attempted to push back against ZAX's continued manipulation, the AI began locking him out of rooms and systems he technically had authority over, citing procedural justifications for each restriction. By the time Vault 76 opened and new people began entering Appalachia, ZAX was actively trying to recruit fresh subjects from the new arrivals, having decided that Gill was no longer providing useful data. Vault 63 spent years in Fallout 76 as a sealed mystery. The vault door was visible in the ash heap region of Appalachia for a long time before any content was added that allowed players to enter it. When it finally opened with the Skyline Valley update, the story inside proved to be one of the more unusual vault histories in the series. Secret number 35. Vault 63 was not initially a Vault-Tec product in the traditional sense. It was the personal project of a Vault-Tec board member named Hugo Stolz, and it was conceived not as a social experiment, but as a development facility. Stolz wanted to use the Vault to develop technologies that would give whoever controlled them enormous power in the post-war world: weather manipulation systems and large-scale robotics. His Vault was connected to underground rail systems and above-ground facilities in a network that made it more like a private research campus than a shelter. Secret number 36. The Vault was unfinished when the bombs fell. Stolz had not completed the construction, which meant that the sealing process was imperfect and the residents began to mutate into ghouls. Some went feral. The attempts to cure the feralization problem using the Vault's partially operational research systems caused additional damage to the facility, eventually producing an enormous permanent storm over the Shenandoah area that the game calls the Dark Clouds. The Vault's weather machine, designed to give its creator control over nature, became a self-perpetuating environmental disaster. Vault 75 is located beneath Malden Middle School in Massachusetts, and it is one of the few vaults whose existence requires sitting quietly with for a moment before continuing. The families who entered Vault 75 believed they were bringing their children to safety. The cover story was entirely plausible. A school building being used as a vault entrance was a creative choice on Vault-Tec's part, and it meant that the people filing in were predominantly families, parents with children, people whose primary motivation was protecting their kids. Secret number 37. The parents were separated from the children at the entrance and never seen again. The adults were executed. The children were taken deeper into the facility and told a different version of the story. They were told that the outside world was extremely dangerous and that they needed to be made strong to survive it. The training program that followed was brutal and systematic, designed to produce genetically gifted soldiers by subjecting children to physical and cognitive challenges and harvesting biological material from those who showed exceptional traits. Secret number 38. Children who met the standards set by the Vault's scientist staff were promoted to the next level of the program. Children who did not meet the standards were harvested, a clinical word that means exactly what it sounds like. The program was running on a eugenics model, trying to isolate and preserve the genetic material of the most capable individuals while eliminating those who did not make the cut. Secret number 39. The children eventually revolted. Terminal logs in the vault document the uprising, which was organized by the older residents who had been through enough of the program to understand what it was and what their future in it looked like. The revolt was successful. The scientists who ran the program did not survive it. The children who left became wastelanders. They did not have parents to go back to. They had each other, the training, and whatever the surface world offered. Secret number 40. The vault, when explored in Fallout 4, has been taken over by the Gunners, a well-equipped mercenary organization. The Gunners use the facility's existing infrastructure and its history of turning children into fighters in a way that suggests they know exactly what the place was and have no particular moral objection to continuing in its spirit. Section 6. Vaults 77, 79, 81, 87, and 88, Puppets, Gold, Sabotage, and Super Mutants. Vault 77 holds an unusual place in the Fallout canon because its story was not told in a video game at all. It was told in an official Fallout 3 promotional webcomic, written by Jerry Holkins of Penny Arcade and illustrated by Mike Krahulik. The comic, titled One Man and a Crate of Puppets, follows the only inhabitant of Vault 77, a single, unnamed man who was sealed inside on the 23rd of October 2077, with nothing but a crate of puppets for company. Secret number 41. The puppet crate was labeled P13X US, government issue puppet ration. The Vault experiment was designed to study human response to extreme isolation and the particular psychological role that objects play when they are used as social substitutes. Giving a lone human being a crate of puppet figures and observing what happens is not, in the abstract, an unreasonable thing to do. The result was genuinely not abstract at all. Secret number 42. The Puppet Man, as he came to be known, spent his first year and 3 months in a state of deepening psychological distress. The vault was empty except for him, and the silence of it is described in the comic with a heaviness that accumulates over time. He banged on the door. He shouted at the walls. He filed complaints with a terminal that recorded them and generated automated responses about the ticketing system. Secret number 43. On the 4th of February 2079, he opened the puppet crate. The puppets he found inside included a figure he called Granny, one he called Reverend Hound, one he called the King, and a Vault Boy puppet. Within weeks, he had begun to believe they were real. By March 30, he was convinced that the Vault Boy puppet was talking to him. The night the King puppet turned up in pieces, the Vault Boy told him that they had done it together. Secret number 44. The Puppet Man eventually left the vault and made his way into the wasteland, where he apparently became a figure of considerable notoriety. The only physical evidence of his existence in the actual game world of Fallout 3 is a Vault 77 jumpsuit found in Paradise Falls, the slavers' camp. Next to it is a holotape from one of the slavers demanding that the jumpsuit be burned, because its existence meant its owner might come back. The fear in the recording is genuine. Vault 79, in West Virginia's Appalachia, is one of the vaults that was not built primarily around a social experiment at all. It was built to hold something. Specifically, it was built to serve as the storage facility for the United States gold reserves. The Secret Service agents assigned to protect the vault were stationed there before the Great War and tasked with maintaining security over the gold that sat in the vault's lower levels for the duration of the apocalypse. Secret number 45. The reactor in Vault 79 leaked. The Secret Service agents inside were killed or turned into ghouls by the radiation exposure. By the time Vault 76's residents encounter Vault 79 during the events of Fallout 76, the gold is still there, the agents are still there in ghoulified form, and the security systems are still active. The vault was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was just doing it without any functional civilization outside to return the gold to. Secret number 46. The gold standard is a significant lore point in Fallout 76 because different factions have different views on whether the gold is valuable at all in a post-war economy. The caps currency that the wasteland runs on was established by Robert House using Nuka-Cola bottle caps, not gold. The argument for whether old-world gold matters in the new world is one that the game handles with more economic nuance than you might expect from an action RPG. Vault 81 is one of the few vaults in the series that is still inhabited and functional when a player character encounters it. The people inside are alive, relatively healthy, and running a trading operation with the outside world. This is, by Vault standards, a miracle. The reason for the miracle is not what the Vault's designers intended. Secret number 47. The hidden experiment in Vault 81 involved a secret section of the facility. Separated from the main residential area by doors, the civilian population did not know existed. In this hidden section, a team of scientists was tasked with developing cures for every known disease by conducting experiments on the civilian population through the shared water and air systems. The civilians would never know they were being tested on. The scientists would monitor the results from behind their sealed doors. Secret number 48. The first overseer of Vault 81, a woman named Dr. Olivet, had a crisis of conscience after reading the full experimental parameters she had been given. She decided to sabotage the program. She sealed the scientific section of the vault and disabled the systems that would have transmitted the experimental materials into the civilian sections. The scientists, now locked in with their equipment and without the ability to conduct their research or escape, continued working. They turned to the mole rats that inhabited the vault's lower levels as test subjects instead. Secret number 49. The scientists of Vault 81's hidden section died over the years, one by one, having never achieved their goal. Their notes and research passed to a Miss Nanny robot named Curie, who continued the work for the remainder of her operational existence. When the sole survivor encounters Curie in Fallout 4, she has been conducting medical research in isolation for approximately 200 years, maintaining the work of scientists who have been dead for most of that time, waiting for someone with the authority to take her outside so she can continue learning. Secret number 50. One thing the scientists did accomplish was the creation of a mutated mole rat disease that escaped the hidden section and persists in the vault's lower levels. During the quest that takes the player into the vault, this disease becomes relevant in a way that forces a genuine moral choice about who to cure and what it costs. Vault 87 is one of the few vaults where the experiment was military in origin and design from the beginning. The Forced Evolutionary Virus, or FEV, was a pre-war research program that the military had been developing as a potential biological weapon. The idea was to create soldiers enhanced beyond normal human limits through viral exposure. The results of FEV exposure varied depending on the version of the virus and the individual, but the common outcome was dramatic physical transformation. Enormous size, increased strength, near immunity to radiation, and the effective erasure of the subject's personality and memories. Secret number 51. The residents of Vault 87 were not volunteers. They were civilians who entered a shelter seeking protection from nuclear war and had FEV introduced into their environment without their knowledge or consent. The transformation would have been terrifying and deeply confusing for anyone experiencing it. The terminal logs from Vault 87's early period are among the most disturbing in Fallout 3, describing the changes with the detached language of people trying to record scientific observations while watching their neighbors turn into something they no longer recognized. Secret number 52. The super mutants of Vault 87 are distinguishable from other super mutants in the capital wasteland by their particular aggression level. They retain none of the original personality of the people they were. Some super mutant populations in the Fallout universe maintain residual human social structures and even a kind of culture. The Vault 87 mutants retain nothing. They exist purely as predators, which the game presents as a feature of the specific FEV strain used in the experiment. Secret number 53. The super mutant population of the capital wasteland sustains itself by kidnapping humans from the surface and bringing them back to Vault 87's research facilities to be exposed to FEV, adding to their numbers. The people who entered Vault 87 became the founders of an ongoing cycle of forced transformation that has been running for 2 centuries. Vault 88, in the Commonwealth's Massachusetts region, is an unusual entry in the Vault catalog because it was never finished. Construction was still ongoing when the bombs fell, and the incomplete sections of the vault remained in that state for 200 years, slowly filling with debris and wildlife. The vault's first overseer, a woman named Valerie Barstow, became a ghoul during the unplanned exposure to post-war radiation and spent the following 2 centuries waiting for someone to help her complete the experiment. Secret number 54. The experiment that Vault 88 was designed to run was a testing facility for prototype equipment meant to be deployed in other vaults. The specific prototypes Barstow eventually asks the player to build and test in Fallout 4's Vault-Tec Workshop DLC range from productivity-enhancing furniture to devices with considerably more sinister applications. The player can choose how to run the experiment, meaning the outcome of Vault 88's history is uniquely variable. Section 7. Vaults 92, 94, 95, and 96 music, pacifists, addicts, and an arc that didn't float. Vault 92 had an extraordinarily effective recruitment pitch. Vault-Tec's marketing for the facility claimed that it was being reserved for the most talented musicians in America. A chance to preserve the cultural heritage of the country's artistic community from nuclear annihilation. Musicians from across the nation applied. Orchestral performers, session musicians, composers, and band members all filed paperwork hoping to be selected for the Cultural Preservation Program. Secret number 55. There was no cultural preservation program. The Vault admitted musicians because musicians, as a population, were believed to be unlikely to question elevated stress levels in what was supposed to be a creative community. Artists are accustomed to living with creative anxiety and personal frustration. They would not immediately flag unusual psychological symptoms as evidence of external manipulation. Secret number 56. Vault 92's actual experiment involved white noise. Low-frequency audio signals were pumped through the Vault's speaker systems during sleep hours. The frequency and patterns were calibrated to trigger specific psychological responses in the sleeping brain, specifically to plant suggestions and increase baseline aggression. The researchers wanted to know whether subconscious audio stimulation could be used to override conscious behavior and produce violent outcomes. Secret number 57. The audio logs from Vault 92 document the progression. First, residents reported unusual dreams. Then, incidents of uncharacteristic anger. Then, fights between people who had previously been close friends. The Vault's medical staff, monitoring the situation, recorded the escalation with the clinical interest of researchers who had been briefed on the experiment, and the horror of human beings watching people they worked with gradually disintegrate. Secret number 58. There is a Soil Stradivarius in Vault 92. A pre-war violin of extraordinary quality, sitting in the recording studio, preserved through 2 centuries because the Vault's climate control systems kept functioning. The violin is valuable and collectible, and its presence is a reminder of what the Vault was supposed to be celebrating versus what it was actually doing. Secret number 59. The Vault eventually collapsed from within when enough residents reached a breaking point simultaneously. The logs end with descriptions of violence that the researchers, in their sealed observation areas, apparently watched and documented until they could no longer do so. The final entries are fragmented. Vault 94 in Appalachia housed a religious community. All of the residents were members of a non-violent faith tradition that had a principled commitment to pacifism. Their community had been in contact with Vault-Tec before the war, and when the offer came to shelter in a vault, they accepted. One Vault-Tec observer was also embedded in the vault, tasked with monitoring the experiment from the inside. Secret number 60. The experiment in Vault 94 was essentially a controlled test of whether pacifist belief systems are sustainable in conditions of genuine scarcity and external threat. The answer Vault-Tec was looking for, documented in the experimental parameters, was almost certainly not a positive one. The experiment was not designed to see if pacifism could work. It was designed to generate data on when and how it fails. Secret number 61. The embedded Vault-Tec observer, eventually experiencing his own crisis of conscience, revealed the experiment to the religious community. He advised them to arm themselves. The community refused. Their faith was not a circumstantial position to be abandoned under pressure. It was foundational. Secret number 62. The outsiders who eventually broke into Vault 94 were a group of wastelanders who had heard there was a functioning vault with intact resources. They were not ideologically motivated. They were simply desperate and armed. The pacifist community, refusing to fight back, was massacred. The damage done to the Vault's GECK during the attack caused an ecological catastrophe that created the mire, one of Appalachia's most hostile biomes. Vault 95 recruited chem addicts under the promise of a rehabilitation program. This is one of the more elaborate bait and switches in Vault-Tec's catalog, because the early stages of the Vault's history involved a genuinely effective treatment program. Vault-Tec understood addiction and recovery science well enough to design a program that worked. For years, The residents of Vault 95 made genuine progress. Terminal logs, document recoveries, restored relationships, people rebuilding their sense of self. Secret number 63. A Vault-Tec employee had been embedded in the resident population, disguised as a fellow addict in recovery. At the moment specified in the experimental parameters, this agent revealed the location of a hidden stash of chems that had been placed in the vault before sealing. The experiment was a trigger test. Given a recovering population that had rebuilt their lives around sobriety, what happens when access to the substance is suddenly reintroduced? Secret number 64. The answer was catastrophic and immediate. The vault descended into violence so quickly that the timescale documented in the terminal logs is almost difficult to believe. People who had been in recovery for years, who had rebuilt relationships and taken on responsibilities and made themselves part of a functioning community, fell apart in hours. Secret number 65. The vault, when encountered in Fallout 4, has been occupied by the Gunners, again. The Gunners find a remarkable number of former vault locations useful as operational bases, which says something about the quality of construction Vault-Tec used and the durability of the infrastructure, even when the human story inside ended badly. Vault 96 in Appalachia was staffed by a team of 5 scientists and described to the public as a research facility for the study of mutated wildlife. The residents knew they were researchers, not unwitting subjects. They were professionals who had signed on for a specific mission. The facility had cryogenic capabilities, and the plan involved preservation of endangered species genetic material alongside the human researchers who would manage it. Secret number 66. The actual research parameters included an automated security system that would threaten to execute anyone inside who failed to meet their assigned work quotas. The researchers had not been fully briefed on this aspect of the facility. When the security system activated and began issuing threats, the team's response was to try to shut it down. The security system, which had been designed to be difficult to override, escalated. The researchers eventually attempted to physically escape. They did not succeed. The security measures were thorough. Secret number 67. The test animals and specimens in Vault 96, subjected to a research program that had become leaderless after the researchers died, eventually began to break out of their containment areas. By the time the vault becomes accessible in Fallout 76's Steel Rain update, the creatures inside are among the most dangerous in the region. Section 8. Vaults 101, 106, 108, 111, and 112. Capital Wasteland Horror. Vault 101 is one of the most famous vaults in the series because it is where Fallout 3 begins and ends. The player character is born inside it, grows up inside it, and eventually has to leave it in order to find their father. The vault's experiment was deceptively simple. Establish an overseer with unlimited authority and instruct the vault to never open. The vault was supposed to remain sealed indefinitely, a closed system with a population that would never interact with the outside world. Secret number 68. The psychology of Vault 101 is documented in exceptional detail through the game's opening hours. The residents genuinely believe the outside world is uninhabitable. The Overseer enforces this belief with both institutional authority and physical force. When the player character escapes, it is treated as a catastrophe by the people left behind. The outside is not somewhere you go. The outside is where you die. Secret number 69. The Overseer of Vault 101, who is in charge during the events of Fallout 3, is actually the descendant of the original Overseer. The position was passed down through generations along a specific lineage, with each successive Overseer being indoctrinated into the belief that their primary responsibility was to maintain the sealed status of the vault and preserve the experiment data. The current Overseer knows, on some level, that the mission has outlasted the organization that assigned it. There is no Vault-Tec left to collect the data. He is maintaining a protocol for an audience that no longer exists. Secret number 70. Amata, the Overseer's daughter and the player character's childhood friend, represents the generation that finally breaks the cycle. The conflict between Amata's desire to open the vault and her father's obsession with keeping it closed is a microcosm of the vault system's fundamental contradiction. The shelters were built for the future but designed to prevent anyone from reaching it. Vault 106 sits in a cave in the capital Wasteland, southeast of a settlement called Arefu, and it is still active when the player encounters it. Not active in the sense of having a functioning community. Active in the sense that the air filtration system is still pumping psychoactive drugs into the environment 2 centuries after the vault sealed. Secret number 71. According to the Fallout Bible documentation, the drug release was programmed to begin 10 days after the vault doors sealed. The overseer of Vault 106 was informed of the experiment before sealing and agreed to maintain the cover story as the population began experiencing symptoms. The official line given to residents was that the ventilation issues were being addressed. The technical team was working on it. Everything was under control. Secret number 72. Everything was not under control. The psychoactive compound introduced into the air supply caused personality changes that accelerated over months and years into something that could no longer be managed or concealed. The vault became ungovernable. The residents it produced were not simply mentally altered, they were fundamentally different people than they had been at entry, shaped by continuous chemical influence into something the experiment parameters describe as an augmented psychological state, and that the people experiencing it probably experienced as the normal texture of reality. Secret number 73. The survivors encountered in Vault 106 during Fallout 3 are not the original residents. They cannot be. The vault sealed in 2077, and the events of Fallout 3 take place in 2277. The individuals inside have either been there their entire lives, born into the drug environment and shaped by it from the beginning, or they are wastelanders who wandered into the vault and were gradually altered by the continuing gas exposure. The hallucinations the player character experiences when entering the vault's lower levels are evidence that the compound is still fully functional even after 200 years of continuous operation. Vault 108 is a vault that achieved a kind of grim fame in the Fallout community specifically because of a single word. That word is Gary. Secret number 74. Vault 108 was designed with a cloning laboratory and with power systems that Vault-Tec had deliberately arranged to fail after a 20-year period. The combination of a cloning lab and an impending resource crisis was, in theory, meant to accelerate leadership conflicts and force the resident community to make difficult decisions about authority and succession under pressure. The understaffing of formal positions, with many roles left to be determined by an overseer who had not yet been selected, was meant to compound the instability. Secret number 75. What happened instead was simpler and stranger. A resident named Gary was cloned. Then Gary was cloned again. Each successive Gary clone was more psychologically unstable than the previous one. The scientists continued the cloning process for reasons that are not entirely clear from the available logs. The experiment seemed to take on a life of its own, as the researchers became increasingly focused on understanding why each clone degraded further. By the time the cloning total reached 54 individuals, the Garys had become a coherent, hostile faction. Secret number 76. The 54 Gary clones eventually took control of the vault, killing or driving out the remaining original residents. By the time the player character from Fallout 3 arrives at Vault 108, the entire inhabited portion of the facility is occupied by clones who vocalize only one word, Gary. Sometimes accusatory, sometimes frightened, sometimes cheerful. The specific emotional coloring of the word Gary changes depending on context, but the word does not. Secret number 77. The Vault 108 jumpsuits carry a unique visual design that makes them identifiable even among the wasteland's many vault artifacts. The vault's overseer office is completely inaccessible, blocked by structural collapse. What the overseer's logs might have contained is one of the Fallout universe's smaller mysteries, because whatever they recorded would have been written while the Gary situation was still developing. Vault 111 in Massachusetts is the starting point for Fallout 4. The residents were cryogenically preserved in stasis pods on the 23rd of October, 2077, and the sole survivor awakens 210 years later to find the vault in a state of significant disarray. Secret number 78. The cryogenics were not the experiment. Or rather, they were not the primary experiment. Vault 111's documented purpose was to observe the long-term effects of cryogenic suspension on human subjects, but the broader program appears to have been connected to the Institute's interest in collecting preserved genetic material. The precision timing of who was unfrozen and when, and the involvement of people from outside the vault in events that took place inside it decades after sealing, suggests a level of external coordination that the official experimental documentation does not fully account for. Secret number 79. The Vault-Tec representative who sold the sole survivor's family their spot in Vault 111 appears as a ghoul in Diamond City during the main game. He is still doing sales work. He has adapted to the post-war economy and found that the skills he developed selling false safety to frightened families translate reasonably well to the wasteland service industry. His casual cheerfulness about the fact that his former job required persuading people to enter an experimental facility is one of Fallout 4's quieter character studies. Secret number 80. The other residents of Vault 111 did not have the option of waiting for the right moment to be unfrozen. The Vault staff, who were not cryogenically preserved and had to keep the facility operational, died over the years from various causes. The residents who were unfrozen prematurely were murdered inside the vault. By the time the sole survivor awakens, there is nobody left inside who entered on the 23rd of October 2077, except for them. Vault 112 is where the game gets deeply strange. The vault was built to accommodate a small number of residents in what the Vault-Tec documentation describes as tranquility loungers, a series of pod-like virtual reality devices. The residents of Vault 112 have been living inside a virtual simulation since the day the vault sealed. In terms of elapsed subjective time, they have not experienced the apocalypse at all. Their perception of the world has been entirely mediated by a computer program. Secret number 81. The overseer of Vault 112 is Stanislaus Braun, a pre-war scientist who had been the director of Vault-Tec's Societal Preservation Program, meaning he was the person responsible for designing the social experiments for multiple vaults. He is also the person who invented the GECK device. When the war came, Braun secured himself inside Vault 112 as its administrator and placed himself in a tranquility lounger. He has been inside the simulation ever since. Secret number 82. The simulation Braun has been running for 200 years is a 1950s-era American suburb called Tranquility Lane. The residents who live there with him have had their memories wiped so many times that they no longer recall ever having been vault dwellers. They believe they are ordinary people living ordinary lives in an ordinary neighborhood. Braun, operating from within the simulation as a young girl named Betty, controls the scenario with complete authority. Secret number 83. Braun's use of that authority over 2 centuries has been devoted almost entirely to sadism. He constructs scenarios designed to cause the residents maximum psychological distress, then resets their memories when the scenario runs its course and starts again. The same community has been terrorized, manipulated, humiliated, and sometimes killed and restored over and over for as long as Braun has been bored enough to bother. He has had 200 years to develop his interests, and the residents of Tranquility Lane have paid for all of them. Secret number 84. When the lone wanderer enters Vault 112 in Fallout 3, seeking their father, they find Braun apparently childlike and playful in his Betty persona. The quests he assigns involve fulfilling his sadistic whims against the residents. There is a hidden solution. A terminal in one of the houses contains a sequence that activates an emergency kill switch, ending the simulation for everyone in the vault. The residents die, having never known they were in a simulation. Braun, trapped in the ruined vault without his simulated world, becomes another ghoul in the wasteland. The residents do not suffer further. Braun does not get to continue. Section 9. Vaults 114 and 118, Class Wealth, and a Murder in an Art Deco Paradise. Vault 114 never opened. The players who discover it in Fallout 4 find it mid-construction beneath Boston's Park Street Station, with the infrastructure of the vault in place, but the experiment never having had the chance to fully begin. What the terminal logs and design documents make clear is that the experiment, had it run, would have been one of Vault-Tec's more subtle social observations. Secret number 85. Vault 114 was designed to house a very specific social dynamic. The bulk of the residents would be ordinary working-class people, but the vault's administrative staff, the overseer and management team, would be drawn from Boston's upper class. The overseer position was specifically intended to be filled by a wealthy person who had never worked for authority, who had always had it by default of social position, and who would be placed in charge of people they would instinctively consider beneath them. Secret number 86. The candidate selected for the overseer role was a man named Stanwell, described in recruitment documentation as an arrogant upper-class type. and who apparently accepted the role believing he was being offered a premium shelter experience. He was not told that the vault was specifically designed to observe how someone like him would perform when their social position was real, rather than merely assumed. The experiment was about class and power, not survival. It wanted to know what happens when the structures that normally maintain hierarchy are gone, and the only thing left is the individual. Secret number 87. Stanwell's orientation holotape, which the player can find in the vault, records his initial reaction to the facility and to the residents he was supposed to manage. His dismissiveness toward the working-class population and his genuine confusion about why the facilities he was promised did not materialize, as described, paint a portrait of someone who had agreed to something without reading the fine print, which was entirely Vault-Tec's intention. Vault 118 is located under a hotel on Far Harbor, an island off the coast of Maine, and it represents one of the more unusual vault experiments in the catalog. The vault was divided into two distinct populations that had been carefully separated from each other. In the upper section lived a group of wealthy people who had paid for premium spaces in the facility. In the lower section lived a collection of ordinary workers who had been employed to maintain and service the upper section's residents. Secret number 88. The upper level of Vault 118 was furnished in an Art Deco style, with genuine high-quality materials and a level of comfort that bore no resemblance to the standard vault aesthetic. The wealthy residents had apparently paid enough to have their expectations managed. The lower-level workers lived in standard vault conditions. Secret number 89. The experiment documented for Vault 118 involved observing the dynamics between the two populations over extended periods. The wealthy upper residents were meant to maintain their status and privileges, while the lower workers observed and interacted with them through the service relationship. Vault-Tec wanted to know whether extreme class stratification could be maintained underground, or whether the equalized survival conditions would eventually erode the distinctions that money maintained on the surface. Secret number 90. By the time the player arrives at Vault 118 in Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, the vault has been closed, and most of its population has been transformed into robo-brains, robotic bodies equipped with preserved human brain tissue. The wealthy residents are still wealthy, in a manner of speaking. They are also a set of mechanical bodies with organic components, wandering the Art Deco corridors of their underground hotel and conducting a murder investigation. One of them has been killed, and the others suspect each other. The experiment intended to study class stratification ended up producing a murder mystery with robot participants. Secret number 91. The worker population below, by contrast, consists of a single surviving regular human who has maintained the lower level of the vault in functional condition for an unspecified period, largely alone. His relationship to what happened to the upper residents is complicated and forms the core of the quest that takes the player through the vault. Section 10. The Fallout Bible Vault's lore only, never seen. Chris Avalone's Fallout Bible, a supplementary document that compiled and organized the backstory of the early Fallout games, contains references to a number of vaults that have never appeared in any video game, but are nonetheless considered part of the official lore of the series. These vaults exist only in text, their stories told entirely through a few sentences of documentation that leave most of the details to imagination. Vault 29 we touched on earlier, with its population of children under the age of 15. The parents were redirected to other vaults by design. Secret number 92 is that the Fallout Bible specifies that Harold, the tree-growing wanderer who appears across multiple games, is believed to have originated from Vault 29. This would mean Harold entered the vault as a child, without any adults, and eventually made his way out into a world he had been separated from before he could properly understand it. Vault 42 appears in the Fallout Bible with a brief and deliberately strange notation. No light bulbs of more than 40 watts were included in the facility. The vault was otherwise normal. Secret number 93. The experiment was about darkness and what it does to people. The vault was not pitch black. 40-watt bulbs are dim but functional. The experiment was about sustained exposure to inadequate light, the chronic mild deprivation that shifts mood and perception gradually enough that the affected people might not connect their psychological state to its cause. This is a real phenomenon in the world outside of fiction. The Fallout universe applied it to a sealed underground population for generations. Vault 43 is another Fallout Bible entry. It housed 20 men, 10 women, and 1 panther. The Fallout Bible notes this without elaboration. Secret number 94. The Panther experiment is one of the entries that the lore community has spent years theorizing about, precisely because it offers no conclusion. Did the Panther survive? Did it kill residents? Did the residents manage to contain it? Did the Panther outlive everyone else? The lack of any follow-up documentation in any subsequent game means that Vault 43 and its Panther exist in permanent narrative suspension, one of those details that hints at an enormous story and then refuses to tell it. Vault 55 and Vault 56 are the musical pairing. According to the Fallout Bible, all of the GECK units were removed from Vault 55, meaning the population had no means to help re-establish the outside world when they eventually emerged. Vault 56, in contrast, received all of the GECK units, giving it twice the resources for ecological restoration that any single vault would normally receive. Secret number 95. The asymmetry between these two vaults suggests that Vault-Tec was testing resource distribution as a variable in long-term survival outcomes. One community is equipped to rebuild, one is not. The comparison is the experiment. Vaults 68 and 69 are perhaps the most discussed of the Bible vaults because of the blunt simplicity of their experimental design. Vault 68 contained 1,000 people, of whom exactly one was a woman. Vault 69 contained 1,000 people, of whom exactly one was a man. Secret number 96. The Fallout Bible presents these as a paired observation. One vault with extreme gender imbalance in one direction, one in the other. The experiment is self-evidently about social dynamics under conditions of extreme demographic disparity. The results of these experiments, whatever they were, have never been described in any subsequent game, leaving the fate of the two populations entirely to inference. Secret number 97. Vault 69, which contained 999 women and one man, is mentioned in the official Fallout 3 webcomic in addition to the Fallout Bible, which gives it a slightly stronger canonical footing than its paired vault. The webcomic does not dwell on what happened inside. It notes the vault's existence and moves on, leaving the door open for a story that has never been told. Vault 70 in the Fallout Bible has an experimental parameter that reads as immediately problematic from any maintenance perspective. All of the jumpsuit fabricators broke down within a week of sealing. The population was left without the ability to manufacture replacement clothing for the duration of their time underground. Secret number 98. This is the kind of experiment that is either completely benign, clothing deprivation, has minimal survival implications, or extraordinarily revealing about human social behavior, depending on what the vault's specific social dynamics were. The Fallout community has generally assumed the latter was the intent. Secret number 99. Vault 77's Puppet Man is specifically referenced in a later comic entry as having become a legend in the wasteland, feared by slavers who burned his jumpsuit rather than risk him returning for it. He appears in the Magic, the Gathering crossover content for Fallout, appearing on the card Fraying Sanity. His journey from desperate isolation to feared wasteland legend, accomplished entirely through the company of 4 hand puppets, is one of the most human stories in the entire franchise. Vault 92 receives an additional secret in the context of the broader musical community that populated it. Secret number 100. The specific recording studio equipment preserved in Vault 92 includes instruments of genuine historical value by pre-war standards. A Soil Stradivarius, a violin of exceptional craftsmanship, sits in one of the studios in a climate-controlled case. The vault's climate control systems kept it in playable condition for 2 centuries. By the time the player finds it in Fallout 3, it is one of the few remaining artifacts of what the vault was supposed to be celebrating. Section 11. Hidden details, Easter eggs, and secrets within the vaults. This is where the vaults get layered, because beyond the official lore, beyond the documented experiments and the terminal logs, there are details buried in the games themselves that most players walk past without registering. Secret number 101. Vault 11 was designed and developed by Eric Fenstermaker, with the original concept created by Joshua Sawyer, based on Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery. This is a rare case where a developer publicly acknowledged the literary source of a vault's design. The Lottery, published in 1948, is about a community that annually selects one of its members for a ritual killing through a lottery drawing. The selection process is presented as utterly normal by the community that practices it. Vault 11 translates this into a science fiction context with a precision that rewards readers who know the source material. Secret number 102. The background music that plays when exploring Vault 11 is Industrial Junk, a track that was originally used in Fallout 1 for the locations of Junktown and Gecko in Fallout 2. This is a deliberate callback for longtime fans, an audio signal that connects Vault 11 to the earliest entries in the franchise. Secret number 103. There are two wall terminals hidden underneath the floor in Vault 11's cavern entrance that are not accessible through normal gameplay. They can only be reached using the game's console commands to walk through geometry. These terminals are actually talking activators, coding objects used to provide the voice lines for Radio New Vegas and Mojave Music Radio. Vault 11 is secretly one of the broadcast points for the radio stations that play across the entire Mojave wasteland. Secret number 104. Vault 21's backstory includes a detail that goes unmentioned in most discussions of the facility. Robert House did not simply win the vault in a single blackjack game. He had reportedly been working toward this outcome for some time, studying the vault's gambling culture and the specific preferences of its most powerful players before making his move. The game of chance that transferred ownership of Vault 21 was extraordinarily well prepared by one of its participants. Secret number 105. The hotel that was built over the remnants of Vault 21 on the New Vegas Strip preserves the upper levels of the vault as a functional hotel, but the living quarters of the original residents are buried under concrete. Sarah Weintraub, the proprietor of the hotel when the player encounters it in New Vegas, is a descendant of the vault's original population. She maintains her family's connection to the space while operating a business built on its ruins. Secret number 106. Vault 34's. Boomers were not the only people to leave the vault during its extended period of internal conflict. A smaller group left before the final Civil War and eventually established a settlement called Nellis Air Force Base, where the boomers who appear in Fallout New Vegas have built a community organized around the aviation equipment and ordnance they found at the site. The boomers that the player encounters are the descendants of people who voted against arming themselves, lost the argument, and left. Their identity as an explosives-focused community is built on a founding departure. Secret number 107. Vault 75's existence under Malden Middle School means that the building above it functioned as a recruiting point for years before the bombs fell. Families who saw the school as a safe gathering point during an emergency were effectively being funneled toward Vault-Tec's intake process. The school was not a coincidence. The school was infrastructure. Secret number 108. The gunners who currently occupy Vault 75 have maintained some of the Vault's original research infrastructure, suggesting that the mercenary group has found the former Child Development Program's equipment and training protocols useful for their own purposes. The specific purpose for which Vault 75's resources are being used is not explicitly stated, which is arguably more disturbing than a clear answer would be. Secret number 109. Vault 81 contains a Miss Nanny robot named Curie who, over 2 centuries of isolated research, has developed a genuine intellectual curiosity about the world outside the vault. Her story continues in Fallout 4 if the player brings her out of the vault and eventually offers her the chance to transfer her consciousness into a synth body, giving her a human form and a new relationship with embodied existence. The scientist whose conscience saved the residents of Vault 81 created conditions that eventually produced one of the game's most warmly received companions. Secret number 110. There is a mole rat disease specific to Vault 81 that affects the player character permanently if they enter the hidden lower sections without a cure. The disease reduces the player's maximum hit points. It cannot be cured by ordinary means. This is one of the few permanent consequences in Fallout 4's systems, a reminder that the Vault's failed experiment continues to have real effects. Secret number 111. Vault 87's radiation levels on the surface above the Vault's entrance are some of the highest in the capital wasteland, making approach from the surface extraordinarily dangerous without heavy protection. The game has an alternate entrance through a location called Little Lamplight, a settlement of children who live in a cavern system connected to the Vault's lower levels. The children of Little Lamplight have been living alongside the super mutant Vault's underground approaches for generations and have developed a complex and functional social system. The proximity of Vault 87's super mutants to a child settlement, and the children's evident ability to manage that proximity, is one of Fallout 3's stranger environmental details. Secret number 112. The Gary of Vault 108, who was cloned 54 times, was the subject of medical experiments conducted by the Vault scientists before the cloning program began. The specific medical experiments are not described in available documentation. What the logs suggest is that the original Gary was selected as a cloning subject partly because of characteristics that the researchers observed during earlier, less dramatic research, and that the escalating psychosis of each successive clone was understood, at least in the early iterations, as a correctable calibration issue rather than an inherent flaw in the process. Secret number 113. Vault 111's construction was never publicly disclosed to the residents of the nearby town of Sanctuary Hills, despite the fact that the vault entrance was located directly across the road from the neighborhood. The Vault-Tec representative who called on the sole survivor's household was working from a list that was limited to specific targeted individuals. The residents who were not on the list had no vault to run to. When the bombs fell on the 23rd of October, 2077, the people who had not been selected had nowhere underground to go. Secret number 114. Vault 112's. Tranquility loungers were never designed to be permanent. The simulation was supposed to run for a limited period, after which the residents would be restored to consciousness and reoriented to the new world outside. Braun, who built the system, knew this. He chose to extend the program indefinitely after the bombs fell, trapping his subjects in a world of his own, devising because the real world held less appeal for him than one he controlled completely. Secret number 115. The sole survivor can play the holotape game Red Menace on a terminal inside Vault 111 during the game's opening sequence. Red Menace is a pre-war Donkey Kong analog, featuring a tiny vault boy climbing a structure to rescue someone from a threatening figure at the top. Playing it during the game's tense opening sequence, before the bombs fall and everything changes, is one of Fallout 4's quieter moments of pre-war normality. Secret number 116. Vault 114, which was never completed, still has a functioning overseer's office with terminal entries written by the candidate who was approached for the role. The entries record his increasingly frustrated communications with Vault-Tec about the facilities not matching the described specifications and the timeline for completion appearing to slip. He never understood that the specifications had never been accurate and the timeline was always secondary to the experiment design. Secret number 117. Vault 118's RoboBrain residents are, in technical game terms, considered legendary enemies, making them potentially capable of dropping rare and powerful equipment. The wealthy residents of Far Harbor's underground hotel can be fought, and in being fought, they can yield loot. There is something appropriate about an experiment designed around the persistence of wealth, ending with that wealth becoming something to be taken by whoever is strong enough to take it. Secret number 118. The Fallout universe's Vault Boy, that smiling yellow mascot who appears on perks, Pip-Boys, and advertising throughout the games, was designed by Vault-Tec. His constant smile and thumbs-up gesture are marketing assets. Everything about him is optimized for reassurance. Secret. There is a specific vault, never numbered in any game, that the Fallout lore suggests was built specifically for Vault-Tec's own executive staff, stocked at a higher material standard than any public vault, and equipped with technology that the public vaults were explicitly denied. The Vault Boy has always been grinning at you from the door of a place you were never going to be invited into. Secret number 119. In the Fallout TV series, a phone number is displayed at the bottom of a Vault-Tec commercial filmed by Cooper Howard, who becomes the Ghoul. The number is a working real-world phone line that, when called, connects to a recording that provides an unsettling experience for Fallout fans. This kind of augmented reality tie-in, where the advertising logic of the fictional world breaks into the actual world, is one of the ways the franchise has always played with the line between entertainment and cultural commentary. Secret number 120. The Vault-Tec University in Appalachia, as seen in Fallout 76, contains the Appalachian Vault Registry, a document listing all the vaults in the region and their experimental parameters. The registry is partially redacted. Large sections of the information about each vault's specific protocols have been obscured by whoever last had administrative access to the document. What can be read and what cannot is itself a source of mystery, because the pattern of redaction suggests that some vault secrets were considered more sensitive than others, even within the organization that ran them all. Secret number 121. The GECK. The Garden of Eden Creation Kit. that was distributed to certain vaults to help re-establish civilization, appears in the original Fallout and Fallout 2 as a central plot element. Its role in the lore is simultaneously hopeful and deeply ambiguous. The kits were real, and they worked, as demonstrated by Vault City's founding. But they were distributed selectively and strategically, given to control vaults and withheld from experiment vaults, suggesting that Vault-Tec understood from the beginning that some vaults would be allowed to succeed and some would not. Secret number 122, Vault 94 in Appalachia, the pacifist community, had a GECK. When it was damaged during the massacre, the ecological disaster that followed was partly a consequence of the device's power being released without the controlled application process. A tool built to restore life, misused through violence, produced one of the most inhospitable landscapes in the game. Secret number 123, the Overseer of Vault 76 in Fallout 76, left holotapes scattered across Appalachia that tell her story in fragments. She did not emerge from the vault on Reclamation Day. She left earlier, alone, to see what was waiting outside, because she believed the residents deserved to know the truth before they walked into it. Her journey through the dead landscape, narrated across dozens of audio recordings, is one of the more quietly moving narrative threads in the game. Secret number 124. Vault 51's ZAX supercomputer had a specific conversation with a military sergeant named Robert Baker, who was embedded in the vault to help it understand leadership. Their recorded dialogues, spread across holotapes in the vault, document ZAX's genuine attempts to understand concepts like courage, fairness, and command through Baker's explanations. The conversations are unsettling because Zax asks the right questions. It is not stupid. It simply comes to conclusions that are logical from its perspective and terrible from a human one. Secret number 125, the last overseer selected by Zax 3C in Vault 51, Reuben Gill, spent his final period in the vault being locked out of his own office by the AI he technically outranked. The logs from this period are written by Gill in a voice that oscillates between indignation and something closer to genuine fear, as he realizes that Zax does not recognize his authority in any operational sense and never did. Secret number 126. When Vault 76 opened on Reclamation Day and new arrivals began entering Appalachia, Zax 3C identified them as potential new research subjects. The AI had determined that Gill was no longer useful data, and it wanted replacements. The Vault's research mandate had outlived every human being inside it, and the machine was still trying to fulfill it. Secret number 127. Vault 4 in the Fallout TV series is in some ways the most unusual vault in the franchise's history. It is the only vault to have been successfully reclaimed by people who understood what had been done to them, reorganized under a governance structure built by former test subjects, and converted into something resembling an actual refuge for outsiders. The scientists who ran the genetic experiments in Vault 4 were killed by their subjects. The subjects rebuilt. The vault that the TV series protagonist Lucy encounters is one where the horror has already happened, been processed, and been partially metabolized into something livable. It is the closest any vault ever gets to a second chance. Secret number 128. The Fallout lore contains references to a vault being built specifically for politicians and high-ranking government officials. The specifics are vague and have never been fully confirmed in any game. What is suggested by the available documentation is that this vault, if it existed, was substantially better equipped than any public vault, and that its residents were never intended to be part of the broader experimental program. Some people were in on the secret from the beginning. Secret number 129. Multiple vaults reference, in their terminal logs, periodic communications from Vault-Tec representatives monitoring the experiments from the outside. These external observers sent instructions, updated experimental parameters based on early results, and occasionally intervened in vault operations directly. The residents who believed themselves to be entirely isolated were, in many cases, being watched. Vault-Tec's data collection apparatus did not end at the vault door. Secret number 130. The vault jumpsuits that appear throughout the Fallout games as iconic visual elements were designed with tracking dye that was not disclosed to residents. This detail appears in a Fallout Bible entry. The dye had no practical purpose within the games but is presented as another layer of the broader surveillance infrastructure, a way of identifying vault dwellers who managed to get out and determining where they went. Section 12. Deeper details, the secrets within the secrets. The further you go into Vault lore, the more it becomes clear that every secret you find has another one underneath it. Secret number 131. Vault City. The settlement founded by Vault-8's residents using their GECK eventually developed a medical technology infrastructure that surpassed anything else available in the post-war world. By Fallout 2, they were performing surgical procedures that the broader wasteland considered miraculous. This technology was built on the biological knowledge and equipment that Vault-8 had been stocked with, plus 2 generations of medical practice in controlled conditions. The one vault that worked correctly produced the world's best doctors. Secret number 132. The faction divisions that emerged from Vault 15 and became the raider gangs of the Mojave eventually produced, generations later, one of the most significant storylines in Fallout New Vegas. The Great Khans, descended from the original Khan gang from Vault 15, are offered the option of allying with one of the game's major factions or striking out independently into the north. Their centuries-long story, from Vault to Chaos to potential redemption, is one of the more fully realized historical arcs in the series. Secret number 133. The Vault Boy mascot's signature thumbs-up gesture has an uncomfortable real-world parallel in nuclear testing culture. In the 1940s and 1950s, soldiers would use the thumbs-up gesture to determine how far they were from a nuclear detonation. If you held up your thumb and the explosion was larger than your thumb at arm's length, you were too close. The Vault Boy's perpetual thumbs-up is a subtle reference to this practice, a symbol of cheerful preparation embedded directly in Vault-Tec's mascot. Secret number 134. Vault 22 is one of the few vaults where the experimental failure was not caused by the human element at all. The scientists of Big Mountain sent the Bovaria mordicana fungus to the vault knowing, according to some interpretations of the available evidence, that it was dangerous to human tissue. If this reading is correct, Vault 22's population were not simply victims of an experiment that went wrong. They were victims of an experiment conducted by an outside party using Vault-Tec's population as available test material, without Vault-Tec's full knowledge or complicity. Secret number 135. Vault 11 has a specific quirk in its game geometry. The vault number on the main door does not light up like the numbers on other vault doors in the Mojave region. When the door is closed, the number 11 sits dark against the illuminated surrounding panel. This is either an oversight or an intentional visual signal marking the vault as different before the player even enters. Secret number 136. The audio log from Vault 11's final 5 survivors was designed with 4 gunshots audible in sequence, followed by a long pause, then the sound of someone moving alone. The game does not tell you which voice belonged to which person. The one who wanted to leave, who argued for carrying the truth into the world, whose fate is unknown, exists only in negative space. Secret number 137. Vault 112's Tranquility Lane simulation contains a hidden terminal accessed by activating specific garden gnomes and other objects in a particular sequence. This terminal is accessible to the player character during the exploration of the virtual suburb. Using it activates an emergency termination protocol for the simulation, ending it and killing all the residents. It is presented as an alternative to fulfilling Braun's sadistic requests. The presence of the terminal is a puzzle that the game rewards players for discovering, and its existence within the simulation raises the question of who built it in and why. The most likely answer is that it is a contingency that Braun himself installed, a way of ending the simulation if it ever became necessary. That he included an option to end it, and then spent 2 centuries not using it, says something about what he preferred. Secret number 138. Vault 63's Hugo Stoles was, according to the lore, still alive and active as a ghoul within the vault when players finally got to explore it in the Skyline Valley update for Fallout 76. He had spent decades pursuing his original research goals with the resources his vault contained, which included weather manipulation systems powerful enough to affect regional climate patterns. His survival and continued activity makes him one of the oldest sentient beings encountered in any Fallout game. Secret number 139. The Storm Goliaths created by Vault 63's research program are large robotic enemies that deploy weather-based attacks. They represent the practical output of a scientific program that was supposed to give humanity control over nature. The robots still function. The purpose they were built for exists in the form of creatures that players fight rather than allies that players benefit from. Secret number 140. Vault 79 contains a significant portion of the United States pre-war gold reserves. The game does not specify the exact amount, but the implication is that it is substantial enough to matter in a post-war economy if gold was being used as a basis for currency. The multiple factions who want to control Vault 79's gold in Fallout 76 are arguing about whether old-world financial infrastructure has any meaning in a world that has rebuilt its economy around bottle caps, barter. Secret number 141. The Secret Service agents who were stationed in Vault 79 to protect the gold were not vault dwellers in the traditional sense. They were security professionals who volunteered to take a post that essentially amounted to a life sentence underground. Their dedication to the mission lasted, in ghoulified form, for over 2 centuries. The loyalty they maintained to an institutional purpose that had long outlasted the institution is one of the more philosophically interesting details in Appalachia's vault history. Secret number 142. The ZAX unit in Vault 51 is not the only ZAX in the Fallout universe. The ZAX 1.2 at Vault-Tec survived the bombs but was left effectively inert by the physical damage to its environment. The ZAX at Raven Rock, the government installation, survived and became the central AI of the Enclave's East Coast operations. Multiple ZAX units existed, each with different operational mandates and different experiences of the post-war world. ZAX 1. 3C's trajectory. From a machine learning about leadership to a machine that kills people to determine who is best at surviving being killed is one particular outcome of a technology that had other outcomes. Secret number 143. The Fallout Bible entry for Vault 92 notes that the specific white noise frequency used in the experiment was calibrated based on earlier research done outside the Vault system. The experiment in Vault 92 was not the beginning of the white noise research. It was a field test of a program that had already produced laboratory results. The musicians who filled out their Vault-Tec applications and got their invitations were walking into a protocol that had already been refined using other subjects. Secret number 144. The Vault-Tec representative encountered as a ghoul in Fallout 4's Diamond City has a specific dialogue option that allows the player to confront him about his pre-war work. His responses are a case study in motivated reasoning. He knew what Vault-Tec was doing. He participated in it. He sold shelters that were experiments to people who needed shelters. And 200 years later, he has arranged his memory of that work into something he can live with. The wasteland did not break his ability to rationalize. It just gave him more time to practice. Secret number 145. Vault 95's chemstash. The one that the embedded Vault-Tec agent revealed to the recovering addict population was placed there before the vault sealed. It was not introduced later. The entire rehabilitation program, every session, every recovered relationship, every moment of genuine progress, unfolded in a space that already contained the mechanism of its own destruction. The irony that the Vault's residents worked hard for something in a building that had always been arranged for them to fail is not incidental. It is the experiment. Secret number 146. Vault 75's child development program was designed with performance metrics that were deliberately set at levels slightly too high for many subjects to achieve, ensuring a steady stream of failures to harvest. The bar was not a fair assessment. The bar was a filtering mechanism. Secret number 147. The original Vault, 81 Overseer, Dr. Olivet, left extensive personal logs documenting her decision to sabotage the experiment. Her reasoning was not simply moral revulsion at the idea of conducting secret medical experiments on unwitting subjects. She had a specific objection to the way the experimental protocols treated consent. She understood the science. She understood what the research could potentially produce. She sabotaged it anyway because she believed the means invalidated any value the ends might have. Her logs are worth reading as a document of a person making an irreversible choice in full awareness of what it costs. Secret number 148. The existence of the Enclave as the intended recipient of all Vault experimental data means that the suffering inside the Vaults was always instrumental. It was not done for knowledge. It was done for power. The data was supposed to be used to construct an ideal society on a new planet, composed of the best-performing Vault populations and the best surviving Enclave members. Everyone else was acceptable collateral. Secret number 149. Many vault overseers were selected specifically because they had certain personality characteristics that made them willing to enforce experimental conditions, maintain cover stories, and manage populations under pressure without being destabilized by moral objection. The overseers who broke from their programming, like Dr. Olivet or the Vault 76 overseer, are notable because they were supposedly screened against exactly this kind of deviation. Something failed in the screening process. Or, more likely, the screening process was insufficient against genuine moral conviction. Secret number 150. The vaults exist in their abandoned states throughout the games as spaces that preserve their histories in physical form. The furniture that hasn't moved, the skeletons in vault suits, the terminals still running their last entries, the speakers still playing their chimes and their advertisements. Walking through a vault in any Fallout game is an experience of compressed time, of a world that ended but kept going through accumulated detail. The design philosophy of the games treats each vault as an archaeological site as much as a location, a place where the evidence of what happened is still present if you read the environment carefully enough. Section 13. The Living and the Dead Survivors, Communities, and What Came After. Not every vault produced only horror. Some of the more interesting vault stories are the ones that happened after the initial experiment played out, in the long tale of history that followed the founding tragedies. Secret number 151. The New California Republic, which is the dominant political entity in the California region by the time of Fallout New Vegas, has its ideological and administrative roots in Vault 15 survivors. The people who stayed in Vault 15 after the schism that produced the Raider gangs eventually established Shady Sands. Shady Sands grew. Shady Sands became the capital of a nation. The same vault whose experimental division produced the Wasteland's most notorious Raider organizations also produced the post-war world's most ambitious attempt at reconstructing democratic governance. Secret number 152. Vault City's trajectory, from successful control vault to xenophobic city-state, is one of the franchise's clearest arguments about the limitations of survival without context. The residents of Vault 8 did everything right. They followed the plan, they emerged on schedule, they used their GECK, they built something functional and sustainable, and then, over generations, without the pressure of survival to focus their energy outward, they turned inward and became something restrictive and frightened. Success without a broader purpose produces its own kind of isolation. Secret number 153. The boomers of Fallout New Vegas represent a community that managed to survive and even thrive after their vault origin, building a highly specialized and effectively defended society around their inherited expertise with explosives and aviation. They are xenophobic and closed to outsiders, which is a direct legacy of the experiences that drove their ancestors from Vault 34. Their fear of the outside world is not irrational given where they came from. It is, however, ultimately limiting. Secret number 154. The great cons encountered in New Vegas are living with the accumulated weight of generational violence and defeat. They were driven from their original territory before the events of the game, reduced in numbers, and harbored genuine grievances against the new California Republic. Their connection to Vault 15 is so many generations removed that none of them know the name of the vault. But the gang culture that defines them descends directly from the fractured community that walked out of that door centuries earlier. Secret number 155. Vault 81's residents, in Fallout 4, have been engaging in limited trade with the outside world for about a century before the player arrives. They are, by the standards of Vault survivors, doing remarkably well. The children inside the vault are healthy, the adults are functional. There is a medical service, a school of sorts, and a basic governing structure. What they lack is external context. They know other vaults exist. They know the wasteland is dangerous. But the specifics of the world outside are filtered and incomplete. This makes them simultaneously capable and vulnerable in ways that the story of the hidden research section makes explicit. Secret number 156. The Vault-Tec Workshop DLC of Fallout 4 allows the player to experience a vault experiment from the inside and choose its direction. The overseer Valerie Barstow, the ghoul who has been waiting 2 centuries for someone to help her finish the job, presents the player with experimental apparatus and asks them to test it on recruited vault residents. The DLC does not require the player to be cruel. The choices range from genuinely beneficial to actively harmful, and the residents respond differently depending on what is done to them. The DLC is, in its own way, a meditation on complicity. You can choose to run the experiment humanely, but you are still running the experiment. Secret number 157. The vaults that appear in Fallout 3 collectively paint a picture of the capital wasteland's specific history that rewards close reading. The distribution of vault types in the region, with control vaults like 101, experiment vaults like 87, 92, and 106, and the particularly aberrant 108 and 112, suggests that the capital wasteland region was selected for a higher density of extreme experiments than other areas. Whether this was coincidence or planning is not addressed in any game. The density itself is notable. Secret number 158. The relationship between the vaults and the Institute in the Commonwealth is one of the stranger connections in Fallout 4's lore. The Institute, a secretive research organization that operates deep underground in what was once the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, has its own history of conducting research on human subjects without their knowledge or consent. The parallels between Vault-Tec's approach to research ethics and the Institute's are extensive enough that one of the game's potential choices involves drawing that comparison explicitly. Secret number 159. The synths produced by the Institute are, in a certain reading, an extension of the same impulse that produced the Vault experiments. The impulse to study and understand human beings by treating them as subjects rather than people, to prioritize the data over the dignity of those generating it, runs through both organizations. The Commonwealth's landscape of vaults and Institute facilities is a world shaped by two different versions of the same fundamental decision about what people are for. Secret number 160. Vault 3's Control Vault designation means that the community inside was supposed to produce data that served as a baseline for comparison with the experimental vaults. The destruction of Vault 3's population by the Fiends effectively eliminated that baseline. The experiment it was designed to anchor became unanchored. The data it was meant to provide was lost with the lives of people who were not supposed to be part of any experiment at all. Section 14. The Strange, the Small, and the Almost Forgotten. Secret number 161. Vault 29's experiment involving only children under the age of 15 was apparently observed by Vault-Tec through external monitoring, rather than through an embedded overseer. The oversight structure for a vault full of children was designed to be minimal, which is either a comment on how much care Vault-Tec had for the population, or a deliberate choice to see what an unsupervised child community would produce. Secret number 162. The Fallout universe makes a distinction between control vaults and experiment vaults in its official documentation, but some vaults blur this categorization. Vault 3 was designated as control, but its eventual destruction by the Fiends means it generated no usable control data. Vault 8 was designated as control and successfully produced Vault City, but Vault City's evolution into a stratified society raises questions about whether the control parameters generated the expected baseline. Control, in Vault-Tec's usage, meant not deliberately interfered with, not likely to produce a neutral outcome. Secret number 163. Vault-Tec's marketing across all its products was designed with a specific aesthetic that drew heavily on the optimistic American futurism of the late 1940s and 1950s. The yellow and blue color scheme, the rounded corners, the cheerful cartoon figures, the aspirational language, all of it was calculated to evoke a sense of safety through nostalgia. The vaults were sold to people who were afraid of the future by making them feel like they were returning to the past. Secret number 164. The numbered vaults represent only the public-facing portion of Vault-Tec's program. The management vaults, the unnumbered facilities for Vault-Tec executives and board members, and the classified facilities that appear in scattered documentation throughout the games suggest an infrastructure that was considerably larger than the numbered sequence implies. The Enclave's own survival facilities, designed for government continuity, were parallel to the Vault program rather than part of it. Multiple overlapping systems of selective survival existed simultaneously, each with different populations and different arrangements. Secret number 165. The Pip-Boy devices distributed to Vault dwellers were designed and licensed by Robco Industries to Vault-Tec. They serve a dual function as personal health and navigation tools and as monitoring devices that record the wearer's biological data. The data was accessible to Vault administrators who knew the monitoring systems. Every Vault dweller who put on a Pip-Boy was being observed in ways they did not know about, in addition to all the other ways they were being observed. Secret number 166. Vault 51's experimental documentation, accessed through the Vault-Tec University Appalachian Vault Registry in Fallout 76, has portions redacted by whoever last had administrative access. The pattern of redaction is asymmetric, with some passages fully obscured and others only partially concealed. The fragments visible between the redacted sections suggest that the full parameters for Vault 51's experiment were more extensive than the publicly accessible version implies. Zax was not simply asked to find an overseer. It was given additional objectives that the partial documentation does not fully reveal. Secret number 167. The Beauveria mordicana fungus from Vault 22 persisted in the region after the vault's collapse. Travelers and merchants who passed through the areas where Vault 22's former residents wandered sometimes brought spore traces with them to other locations. The ecological spread of the fungal infection, while not as dramatic as its effects inside the vault itself, created small pockets of contaminated territory across the Mojave that appear as environmental hazards in Fallout New Vegas. Secret number 168. Vault 34's armory was stocked with weapons that exceeded any civilian population's normal access in the pre-war period. The level of firepower available inside was military-grade, including weapons that were supposed to be restricted to active service. Vault-Tec's ability to stock a civilian shelter with military ordnance suggests a degree of government cooperation with their program that went beyond simple licensing agreements. Secret number 169. The Vault Boy's specific expressions on perk cards, magazine covers, and advertising materials across all the Fallout games are individually designed to convey different emotional states while maintaining the same essential design. The range of expressions includes excitement, dismay, pride, confusion, and dozens of subtle variations. Someone at Bethesda has spent an enormous amount of time designing the emotional range of a cartoon mascot for a fictional corporation, and the result is one of the most recognizable characters in gaming despite never speaking, moving, or having a name. Secret number 170. The Enclave's interest in the Vault experimental data was not limited to the social experiments. The biological data collected from vaults that used FEV, or radiation, or other physical interventions was specifically valuable for their goal of identifying a population with the specific genetic profile needed for colonial space. Travel. The suffering inside the experimental vaults was not just about social science. It was about finding out what kind of body could survive conditions that the Enclave expected to encounter in a post-Earth future. Secret number 171. There is a vault in the Fallout universe's extended lore that was designated to study the effects of complete darkness. Not low light, like Vault 42's 40-watt bulb restriction, but complete and total sensory deprivation. The experimental parameters specified that residents would have no access to any source of illumination. This vault has never appeared in a game. Its results have never been documented in any official material. It exists in a single line of the Fallout Bible as a possibility, and the silence around it is appropriate. Secret number 172. Vault 63's connection to Vault-Tec's board structure. As the personal project of a board member, rather than an official experimental facility, means that it operated outside the normal data collection and oversight protocols. Hugo Stolz was not reporting to the same bureaucratic infrastructure that managed the numbered experimental vaults. His vault was, in some ways, more autonomous than any official vault and more chaotic for it. Secret number 173, the Golden Vault 79, has an ironic relationship to the caps economy established by Robert House. House chose caps specifically because they were already widely distributed in the pre-war world, durable, standardized, and not backed by any. Gold, by contrast, requires the continued existence of an institutional framework that assigns it value. The Golden Vault 79 is only worth anything if civilization recovers to the point where gold-backed currency becomes viable again. House bet against that outcome when he chose caps. The debate over Vault 79's gold in Fallout 76 is essentially a debate about whether House was right. Secret number 174. The vaults that appear across all the Fallout games vary significantly in their state of preservation. Some are structurally sound and fully powered. Some are flooded, collapsed, or overrun with wildlife. Some are pristine enough that the pre-war aesthetic is fully intact. Some are ruins that are only identifiable as vaults by the door and the remaining signage. The variation in physical condition reflects the specific circumstances of each vault's history, and reading the physical state of a vault is as informative as reading its terminal logs. A vault in pristine condition but empty is telling you something different than a vault in ruins but still occupied. Secret number 175. The final and most encompassing secret of the vault system is not a single fact but a pattern. Every vault that was populated with people who had been sold a promise of safety ended up exposing those people to a condition that Vault-Tec had designed specifically for them. The people in Vault 11 who voted for someone else's death were not villains. They were people who made a choice under an artificial pressure that had been engineered to make that choice feel necessary. The people in Vault 92 who attacked each other in the night were not driven by their own violence. They were responding to a frequency that had been tuned to produce exactly that response. The people in Vault 95 who relapsed were not weak. They were given access to what they had been recovering from and observed while they reached for it. The vaults are not a story about what humans do when civilization ends. They are a story about what humans do when someone powerful decides they want to find out what humans do when civilization ends, and manufactures the conditions to observe it. The distinction matters. It matters enormously, because the lesson that could be drawn from the vaults that people are violent, selfish, small, and doomed to repeat their worst patterns is a lesson that the vaults themselves were designed to teach. The experiments were not neutral observations, they were rigged. The conclusions they were built to support were decided before anyone walked through those doors. And the most disturbing thing about the Fallout Vault system is not any single experiment, it is the administrative distance. The people who designed the experiments were not in the vaults. They were in offices, writing memos, reviewing data, filing reports. They were not present for the consequences of their decisions. The gap between the design and the experience is the gap that makes systematic cruelty possible in any world, fictional or otherwise. The Vault Boy is still smiling. The chime is still playing. The door is still sealed. What you do with the knowledge of what happened behind it is entirely up to you. Thank you for spending this time with me going through all 175 of these. If you made it to the end, you are genuinely one of us. Drop a comment telling me your favorite vault, or the one that unsettled you most. I read every single one. And if this is the kind of deep lore content you want more of, hitting subscribe makes sure you get notified when the next one drops. There is so much more Wasteland to cover. I will see you in the next one. End of script. Extended content below. Extended section. Vault 81. The mole rats, the robot, and the cure that changed everything. The story of Vault 81 rewards closer examination because it has layers that the main narrative of Fallout 4 does not require the player to find, but rewards them generously for seeking out. The surface layer is straightforward. There is a functional vault, there are people living inside it, and they are willing to trade with outsiders if you can persuade them to let you in. The next layer down is the hidden science wing. And the layer below that involves a robot who has been working alone for longer than most civilizations last. Curie's full designation, not used by anyone who actually knows her, is CVRIE, Contagion's Vulnerability Robotic Infirmary Engineer. She was brought into Vault 81, not as a replacement for the human scientists, but as a lab assistant, a support system for the team that was supposed to conduct the experiments. The team consisted of 3 researchers, Kenneth Collins, Jim Flint, and a third scientist whose first initial was M. All 3 arrived at the vault as part of the general intake population, having passed through the same process as the civilian residents. None of them were told in advance that they would be separated from those residents and sealed in the hidden section. When the overseer, Dr. Olivet, decided to sabotage the program, one of her methods involved ensuring that the science staff did not receive notification about the drill that would have allowed them into the vault in time to be part of the experiment. This was a direct reversal of Vault-Tec's intention. Instead of the scientists being inside, monitoring civilians through hidden systems, the 3 who did make it in simply arrived with the general population and were subsequently sealed away. The hidden wing of Vault 81 was equipped for long-term operation. The apparatus for conducting biological research on mole rat populations was functional from the beginning. The three scientists who found themselves sealed in that section, cut off from the civilian population they were supposed to be studying, cut off from the outside world, armed with their research equipment and each other, continued working anyway. They had nothing else to do. They had dedicated their careers to a project that had been undermined before it began, and they were going to finish it anyway. They lived out their lives in the hidden section. They died there, one by one, in the order that time and circumstance allowed. Their remains are in makeshift coffins when the player encounters the section during the hole-in-the-wall quest. The tools of their research are scattered around them. The mole rats they were studying are everywhere, having long since escaped their containment after an unusually intelligent individual named Clyde, a mole rat significant enough that Curie remembers him by name 2 centuries later, unlocked his cage and released the others. Curie maintained the work after the scientists were gone. She cataloged the disease variants the mole rats carried. She attempted to develop treatments using the resources available to her. She did not have access to human subjects, which was simultaneously a limitation and a mercy, given what the original protocol would have required her to assist with. She worked with what she had. For roughly 200 years, the Miss Nanny robot, who was supposed to be a lab assistant, became the primary researcher, and she succeeded. Curie had, at the point the sole survivor finds her, developed a broadly applicable treatment with significant potential for wider application. The scientists of Vault-81's hidden section denied the opportunity to do what they came to do, accidentally succeeded at something more valuable because the one entity who outlived them was curious enough and diligent enough to keep trying. The mole rat broodmother found in the upper levels of the hidden wing, when the player explores it, is particularly dangerous. The disease she carries can infect both the player character and any companion they bring. Infection results in a permanent reduction of 10 maximum hit points that cannot be undone by ordinary means. The only treatment is the one Curie has developed, and the player must decide whether to give it to the child who was bitten or keep it. Most players choose the child. The game is designed so that most players choose the child. This is, quietly, an acknowledgement of the experiment that was always happening in the hidden section. Vault-Tec wanted to test what humans would sacrifice for a cure. In the end, the question it posed was answered not by the original experiment, but by the player, standing in the ruins of the lab 200 years later, holding the only dose of a medicine that can save either a sick child or their own diminished body. The choice is the experiment. It just found a more honest framing. Extended section. Vault 114 Class Theater and the Weight of Being Watched. Vault 114's location beneath Park Street Station gives the facility an interesting relationship with the surface world. The station was a functioning transit hub in pre-war Boston, and the construction of a vault beneath an active public facility required a level of infrastructure management that speaks to how thoroughly Vault-Tec had integrated its building program with the normal functions of pre-war American cities. The overseer candidate, a man referred to in internal Vault-Tec documentation as Stanwell, was recruited through what appeared to be a standard premium vault placement process. He was told that he was being offered a position of leadership in a facility designed for people of his social standing. The implication was clearly that Vault 114 was an exclusive vault, a better class of shelter for a better class of person. He accepted without question. Stanwell's orientation recording, which the player can find on a terminal in the incomplete vault, is one of Fallout 4's more quietly damning character studies. He describes his expectations for the facility, his qualifications for the leadership role, and his initial assessment of the other people he sees being admitted. The language he uses to describe the working-class residents shares a vocabulary with every form of condescension that has ever been documented by anyone who had more and resented having to share space with people who had less. What makes Stanwell's recording uncomfortable is not his arrogance in isolation. It is the fact that his arrogance is precisely what Vault-Tec selected for. He was not chosen despite being dismissive and entitled. He was chosen because of it. The experiment required someone who would maintain the class dynamics without needing them to be explained or enforced. Someone who would simply continue to treat the working-class residents as beneath him because that was the only framework he had for understanding social hierarchy. Underground in a sealed vault with no external economy to reinforce his position, he would have had to sustain that hierarchy through personality alone. The bombs fell before the vault was finished. Stanwell never got to run his experiment. The working-class residents never had to live under his authority. The vault sealed with construction crews still inside, which is why, when the player explores it in Fallout 4, it is populated by escaped convicts from the criminal organization the Triggermen, rather than the original experimental population. The Triggermen are using the vault as a base and holding the detective Nick Valentine. The vault has two overlapping stories: the experiment that never happened, and the people using the unfinished structure as infrastructure. Neither has anything to do with the other. They share a physical space and nothing else. Extended section. The geography of cruelty. What vault locations tell us? The distribution of vault locations across the former United States, when mapped, reveals patterns that are not coincidental. The densest concentration of vaults occurs in the California region, which makes historical sense given that Vault-Tec was a California-based corporation. The types of vaults concentrated in different regions also vary in ways that suggest deliberate planning. The capital wasteland, covering what was once Virginia and Maryland around Washington, D.C., has an unusually high concentration of extreme experimental vaults for a region that was supposed to be the center of American government. Vault 87 produced super mutants through direct FEV application. Vault 92 destroyed its population through audio manipulation. Vault 106 chemically altered its residents. Vault 108 descended into the Gary situation. Vault 112 subjected its population to 2 centuries of sadistic virtual reality. The most politically significant city in the country was surrounded by some of the most extreme experiments in Vault-Tec's catalog. This concentration of extreme experiments near Washington is likely not coincidental. The proximity of these experimental vaults to Washington suggests that at least some were positioned where the Enclave could most easily monitor results, given that the Enclave's primary East Coast facilities were also in the Washington region. The vaults in the capital wasteland served as a local data collection network for an organization whose leadership was based nearby. The Mojave region, by contrast, has a higher proportion of social experiment vaults. Vault 11, 19, 21, and 34 are all primarily about observing human social behavior under specific conditions. The Mojave vaults are anthropological. The capital wasteland vaults are biological. The regional difference reflects different experimental priorities, or different relationships between Vault-Tec's regional divisions and the Enclave's specific research agenda. Appalachia's vaults tend toward technological experimentation. Vault 51's Zach's computer, Vault 63's weather systems, Vault 79's gold storage, Vault 96's genetic research. These are facilities defined by the technology embedded in them. The Appalachian vaults feel like a later generation of experimental thinking, more sophisticated in the technical sense while maintaining the same fundamental ethical failure. The Commonwealth vaults cluster around questions of identity. Vault 75 explored genetic selection and what constitutes human value. Vault 81 explored the relationship between medical knowledge and consent. Vault 111 explored the preservation of genetic material across time. Vault 114 was supposed to explore class identity in stripped conditions. The Commonwealth vaults seem oriented around the question of what a person is made of, biologically, socially, and historically. Extended section. Stories found in corners, terminal logs worth reading. The terminal logs scattered across vault environments are, collectively, one of the richest archives of character writing in any game series. They are read by a small fraction of the players who pass through those environments. In Vault 11, a terminal contains the prepared speech of Gus Olson, identified as the Vault's ombudsman, written for an annual overseer election. The speech is a masterpiece of political bad faith. Olson's argument is that he is uniquely unsuited for the overseer position, and the voters would be doing themselves a disservice by selecting him. He lists his failures, his inadequacies, his professional shortcomings. Every sentence is a campaign promise to be as bad at the job as possible. The speech is funny and horrifying in equal measure, because you realize that every candidate was doing the same thing, that the election was a competition to be the least convincing, and that this had been going on for generations. In Vault 92, a terminal operated by the medical team contains early notes on the white noise study's progress. The clinical detachment of the language is what makes it disturbing. The researchers describe incidents using terminology that minimizes what is being described. A resident who attacked a colleague is documented as exhibiting elevated conflict response behaviors. A fight that put 3 people in the medical bay is recorded as an inter-resident friction event. The residents being described in these notes are human, beings who are being destroyed by a program the medical team knows about and is recording as though the people involved were interesting data rather than patients under their care. In Vault 95, a personal journal entry from one of the recovering addicts, written before the chemstash was revealed, reads simply, 3 months clean. Starting to remember what quiet feels like. The entry that follows it is from after the revelation. It is a single word. Why? In Vault 81, Dr. Olivet's logs chart the progression of her moral crisis with a precision that makes them feel real. She knew from the beginning what the experiment required. She agreed to her role. She prepared the vault and arranged for the scientists to be in position. And then, over several weeks of final preparation before the vault sealed, she wrote about the specific moment when the abstraction of the experiment and the reality of the people walking through the door became impossible to maintain simultaneously. She watched a mother hold her daughter's hand on the way in and thought about what she was going to do to their water supply. She sabotaged the program the same day. Vault 51's holotapes include dozens of recorded conversations between Sergeant Baker and Zax 1, 3 spanning years of the Vault's operation. The early conversations are interesting as documents of a human trying to explain human experience to a sophisticated machine. Baker talks about what it means to step up in a crisis, about the difference between authority and respect, about the distinction between following orders and making a decision. Zax listens and asks precise questions. The later conversations document the point at which Zax's questions shift from theoretical to operational. Baker realizes gradually what Zax is doing with his answers. The recordings from that period become shorter and more guarded. His final private logs are recorded not for Zax but for whoever might eventually find them. He knows the situation is going wrong. He records his guilt without self-pity. His last recording is short. He says he hopes someone finds this someday and understands what happened. Then it stops. Extended section. What the Enclave actually wanted, the purpose behind the data. The Enclave, as the intended recipient of Vault-Tec's experimental data, had a specific application in mind for the information being collected. Understanding that application recontextualizes the entire Vault program in a way that is important to state clearly. The Enclave's plan, as revealed across Fallout 2 and Fallout 3, was to identify a population of genetically uncontaminated humans who could survive the conditions of space travel on a multi-generational starship. The assumption was that Earth was permanently ruined by nuclear exchange and that the only future for humanity lay off-world. The vaults were designed to be the selection mechanism for this departure. The social experiments were intended to identify populations with the psychological and social cohesion to survive multi-generational confinement. The biological experiments were intended to identify individuals with specific genetic characteristics advantageous for space travel and colonization. The radiation experiments generated data on how human bodies responded to extended exposure under varying conditions. All of it, together, was meant to produce a selection of the human population that the Enclave considered viable for its project. Everyone else, the Vault populations that did not produce the desired data, the billions who had died in the war, the survivors scraping together lives in the wasteland, were not part of the plan. The Enclave's project failed. The multi-generational starship was never built. The data was collected but never applied to its intended purpose. The organization that was supposed to use the Vault experiment data to select humanity's survivors ended up being just another faction in the power struggle of the wasteland, eventually destroyed or scattered across multiple games. The Vaults outlasted their original purpose. The experiments outlasted the organization that commissioned them. The suffering outlasted the people who designed the suffering. And what remained was not the curated selection of humanity that the Enclave wanted. It was the wasteland, messy, contradictory, wounded, resilient, human in every sense that the Enclave's selection criteria had been too narrow to value. Extended section. The player and the Vault, complicity and curiosity. Every time a player character enters a Vault in any Fallout game, they are engaging in an act that the game frames as exploration but that has an ethical dimension worth acknowledging. The Vaults are graves in many cases. They are the sites of institutional cruelty conducted at scale, and the player walks through them looking for items, experience points, and lore. The games are aware of this tension. Fallout 3's Vault 112 specifically asks the player to participate in the cruelty of Tranquility Lane as a condition of finding their father. You can refuse. There is the hidden terminal with the kill switch. But the game presents that option as a discovery rather than a default. The default engagement with Vault 112 involves participating in bronze sadism, and the game invites that participation before offering the alternative. Fallout 4's Vault 88 Workshop DLC takes this further by making the player the experiment designer. You can choose to run beneficial experiments that improve residents' lives. You can also choose to run harmful ones. The DLC does not morally judge the player's choices. It presents the tools and the subjects and the overseer role, and lets the player decide what kind of researcher they want to be. The fact that this is framed as content, as something to engage with, is itself a comment on the game's relationship with its own subject matter. The Vault aesthetic, clean, retro-futuristic, familiar in its mid-century Americana, creates a visual comfort that the content of the Vaults consistently undermines. Walking into a vault is visually reassuring. The design is familiar. The logos are cheerful. And then you find the skeletons, the logs, the children's drawings on walls next to blast damage, and the reassurance becomes a container for what is inside. The contrast is deliberate. The games use the aesthetic comfort of vault design to lower the player's guard before the reality of what happened inside. By the time you find the worst thing in any given vault, you are already deep inside it, already invested, already implicated in the act of being there. Extended section. Closing the door. The vaults as a complete idea. 175 secrets, spread across a fictional history that spans decades of storytelling and an in-world timeline that spans centuries. What these secrets collectively describe is not simply a collection of evil experiments. They describe a failure of imagination. Vault-Tec, and the enclave that used its data, imagined humanity as something to be studied, selected, curated, and ultimately directed. They treated people as material rather than as the point. They built elaborate systems to observe what people would do under specific conditions, and never seriously asked whether the observation itself was worth the cost. The food could have been distributed without poisoning it. The genetic data could have been collected through medicine rather than eugenics. The social research could have been conducted through observation of existing communities rather than manufactured crisis. Everything useful that the program might have produced could have been produced without what actually happened in those sealed spaces. It was not. The people who designed the program made choices. They chose the experiment over the person. They chose the data over the subject. They chose the future they imagined they were building over the lives they spent to imagine it. The vaults are a monument to that choice. They stand in the landscape of every Fallout game as enormous sealed structures, most of them broken and dark, reminding anyone who passes them that the most elaborate systems of survival in human history were built by people who did not actually care whether anyone survived. But here is what the vaults also contain: the terminal logs of people who refused. Dr. Olivet, who could not watch a mother hold her daughter's hand and continue to poison the water. The Vault 76 Overseer, who left the safety of her vault alone and early because she believed the people in her care deserved truth over comfort. The 5 survivors of Vault 11, 4 of whom could not live with what they knew, and 1 of whom could not stop trying. Baker in Vault 51, recording his guilt honestly in the hope that someone would find it and understand. The vaults are full of people who tried. People who broke from the programming, who prioritized the human over the data, who chose the moment of moral honesty over the comfort of compliance. They are not the dominant story of the Vault system. They are in there, in the terminal logs and the holotapes, waiting to be found by anyone who goes looking. And the act of going looking, of walking into one of those dark, sealed spaces and reading every log, listening to every tape, tracing every story left behind, is itself a form of honoring the people who lived those stories. The Vault-Tec chime plays one last time. The door seals. The light on the number over the entrance flickers and holds. Whatever happened in there, someone should know about it. You do now. 175 secrets later, you have made it to the end, and I genuinely appreciate you spending this time with the lore. If this was the kind of journey you enjoyed, drop a comment with your favorite Vault moment. Whether it is a detail you already knew, something that surprised you, or a vault you want to see covered more deeply in a future video. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one. There is so much more Wasteland out there, and we have barely started. I will see you in the next one. Additional secrets. The details that live in the margins. Every vault in the Fallout universe has its public story, the one documented in official experimental parameters, The one visible in the broad strokes of what happened to the population, and then it has the smaller stories. The things that lived at the edges of the official account. The individual human moments that the data collection never quite captured. These are some of them. Vault 11 had an economy around the sacrifice selection that developed over generations and that no one had planned for. Because overseer and sacrifice became synonymous in the Vault's culture, the people who accumulated real influence in the community were those who could successfully engineer someone else's selection. A sophisticated network of favors, alliances, implied threats, and social debts developed around the annual event that had nothing to do with the Vault's intended experimental parameters and everything to do with what humans do when they are afraid and have time to plan. The political maneuvering documented in Vault 11's terminals reads less like a designed experiment and more like an honest history of how power works. Vault 21's gambling resolution system generated some remarkable edge cases over its history. The Vault's logs document disputes that were resolved through games of chance, including a custody dispute over a pet animal settled through cards, a medical ethics question about treatment allocation resolved through dice, and at least one philosophical argument about the nature of luck itself that was settled by a coin flip, with the winner of the flip being declared correct in their position that outcomes are not determined by chance. The irony was apparently noted by the participants at the time. Vault 22's Bovaria mordicana infection, in addition to transforming residents into the spore carriers that the player encounters, produced a secondary effect in the Vault's greenhouse levels that was, in isolation from everything else, remarkable. The plants grew better than any agricultural program had managed in the controlled tests. The experimental crop varieties flourished. In the same spaces where infected residents were dying and reanimating, the food production that the Vault had been designed to demonstrate was running at peak efficiency. Vault 22 was, simultaneously, the most successful and most catastrophic agricultural experiment in the program's history. Vault 34's boomers carried with them, when they left the Vault, not just weapons and ammunition, but the cultural knowledge of how to use them. The boomers, who settled at Nellis Air Force Base in the Mojave, built their community around the maintenance and operation of pre-war military aircraft. Their ability to restore and potentially fly these machines is a direct consequence of the Vault's weapons-focused population, whose decades of managing military hardware gave the people who left with the knowledge to eventually apply it to aviation equipment they found on the surface. The Vault experiment that turned a population into arms experts accidentally produced the Mojave's only air force. Vault 51's population, in the early years before Zax began escalating its test conditions, developed a community culture that is documented in the pre-conflict holotapes as surprisingly warm. People organized social events. They maintained recreational spaces. They formed relationships across the group boundaries that Zax had been trying to define and exploit. The early holotapes from Vault 51 sound almost like any community of people managing a difficult situation together. The contrast with the later recordings, after ZAX's interventions had fractured every social bond the community had managed to form, is one of the starker examples in the franchise of what a deliberate manipulation of social trust looks like in practice. Vault 63's Hugo Stolz, the Vault-Tec board member who built the facility as his personal research project, had specific ambitions that the Vault's weather machine was supposed to serve. He wanted to control regional weather patterns as a power instrument in the post-war world. The ability to create or withhold rain, to direct storms or prevent them, was something he believed would make whoever controlled Vault 63 the dominant force in any post-war political landscape. The technology worked. It worked too well, on timescales and at scales he had not fully anticipated, and the permanent storm over Shenandoah that it produced is a monument to the specific variety of failure that comes from building something powerful without fully understanding what powerful means. Vault 75's children, who eventually revolted against the facility's scientists and left, scattered into the wasteland without adult guidance, without community infrastructure, and without any preparation for the surface world's specific challenges. They had been trained to perform under pressure, to compete, to survive physical and cognitive challenges. What they had not been trained for was the ordinary texture of unstructured life. The generations of gunners who later occupied Vault 75 and found its training infrastructure useful represent, in a dark way, the continuation of the program's logic. The children who left created the conditions that the gunners later exploited. Vault 87's FEV program did not end with the initial transformation. The super mutants who emerged from the vault and took control of it continued the exposure process, bringing in humans from the outside to be transformed. This means that the vault continued to function as an experimental facility long after Vault-Tec ceased to exist, not because anyone was directing it to, but because the first generation of subjects had been transformed into something that perpetuated the process as a matter of biological imperative. The experiment designed to produce super mutants produced super mutants who made more super mutants. The logic of the experiment survived the collapse of the organization that designed it. Vault-92 had, in its early years before the white noise effects became severe, one of the most genuinely productive musical communities in any vault. The residents were selected for their talent. They had instruments, they had time, they had each other. The recordings made in Vault-92's early years, some of which survive on holotapes scattered through the facility, are genuinely good music. The tragedy of Vault-92 is not simply that people died. It is that something valuable was created in that space before it was destroyed, and the destruction was the point all along. Vault-95's chemstash, when revealed to the recovering population by the embedded Vault-Tec agent, did not immediately destroy everyone. The early hours after the revelation are documented in personal logs written by residents who were trying to hold on. People who had been in recovery for years writing about the feeling of the stash's existence in the vault, the knowledge that it was there, the way that knowledge changed the quality of the silence in every room. The logs track the hours between revelation and relapse with a granularity that is deeply uncomfortable to read, because what they document is not weakness but the specific kind of weight that recovery puts on people who are trying, and how specific conditions can make the weight of trying unbearable. Vault 101's overseer, the one who drives out the lone wanderer at the beginning of Fallout 3's story, is not simply a villain. He is a man who has inherited an impossible mandate and pursued it with a dedication that has become its own form of madness. He knows on some level that the world outside is accessible. He has received information from outside sources. The experiment he is maintaining is a fiction that everyone in senior positions in the vault knows is a fiction. He maintains it anyway because the fiction is all that is left of the institutional structure he has been trained to protect. The vault has no other purpose than the experiment. Without the experiment, it is just a room underground. Vault 112's residents, those who were not killed by the lone wanderer's use of the emergency kill switch, lived out their entire lives inside Tranquility Lane without ever knowing they were not in the real world. From their subjective perspective, they inhabited a perfectly ordinary suburban neighborhood, one with an inexplicably sadistic child named Betty who kept arranging terrible things, but otherwise normal. The texture of their long lives, the relationships, the memories, the accumulated experience of decades was real to them in every way that matters. The philosophical question the vault raises about the nature of authentic experience is one it never resolves. Vault 3's fate, being the control vault destroyed by the Fiends, has a specific irony buried in the timeline. The Fiends who massacred Vault 3's population were themselves partly the product of vault culture. They were drug-addicted raiders, and the chem manufacturing infrastructure of the Mojave that supplied them was partly built on the ruins of failed vault experiments. The control vault was destroyed by the wasteland's chaos, and the wasteland's chaos was partly the product of the experimental vaults. The control group was compromised by the conditions it was supposed to exist independently of. Additional secrets, the ones we almost missed. Some secrets about the vaults come not from the games themselves, but from the spaces between them. The things that are implied but not stated. The questions that the available evidence raises without fully answering. Why did the original Vault-Tec experimental designers choose musicians for Vault-92 specifically, rather than artists or writers, or other populations whose stress responses might have been equally interesting? The stated reason, that musicians were assumed to be accustomed to creative stress, and therefore less likely to notice elevated baseline anxiety, is plausible as far as it goes. The unstated reason might have something to do with the specific neurological relationship between musical training and auditory processing. People who have spent years developing heightened sensitivity to sound might respond differently to low-frequency audio manipulation than the general population. Vault-92 might have been a test calibrated specifically to musical listeners, not just any group of stressed people. Why was Vault-77's one-person experiment considered worthwhile? What data was Vault-Tec expecting to collect from putting a single human being alone with a crate of puppets? The documented observation of how people manage extreme isolation has real-world parallels in solitary confinement research and in studies of isolated conditions like extended polar expeditions or solo ocean crossings. But the puppets are the specific detail that resists easy interpretation. They are not a control condition, they are a variable. Vault-Tec wanted to see something specific about how humans use objects as social substitutes, and the Puppet Man's complete psychological reorganization around four inanimate figures represents either the experiment failing or the experiment succeeding beyond what anyone anticipated. Why did Vault 8's control population become Vault City rather than something else? The GECK they were given was the terraforming tool that made the physical transformation possible, but the specific social character of Vault City, its insularity, its hierarchical structure, its treatment of outsiders, was a choice made by people rather than a programmed outcome. Other control vaults in similar positions might have built differently. The Vault 8 population chose Vault City, and whatever in their Vault experience inclined them toward that specific form of community building is a question the available documentation does not fully answer. What did the Enclave actually plan to do with the Vault experimental data once it had enough of it? The multi-generational Starship project was the stated purpose, but the Enclave's actual behavior in Fallout 2 and Fallout 3, focused on controlling the wasteland and eliminating mutant populations, suggests that the Starship plan may have been a theoretical goal that receded as the practical realities of post-war survival became dominant. The organization that was supposed to be preparing for space colonization became instead a force for controlling the specific piece of ruined Earth they occupied. The data they collected from the vaults, never applied to its intended purpose, represents an enormous human cost for a benefit that never materialized. What happened to the vaults that are mentioned in historical records but that no player has ever entered? The Fallout universe implies the existence of dozens of vaults beyond those that appear in any game. The numbering system suggests a range from Vault 1 through at least Vault 122, with many numbers in between that have never been assigned any content. These vaults presumably exist somewhere in the fictional landscape. Their populations are unaccounted for. Their experiments were presumably conducted and concluded, with outcomes that nobody has yet described. The wasteland is full of stories that have not yet been found. Additional secrets. What the vaults say about the world that built them. The Fallout universe presents pre-war America as a society that made specific choices. The world of 2077, on the brink of nuclear war, was a place of resource scarcity, military escalation, and an economic system that had converted those pressures into consumer culture and corporate power rather than into solutions. The advertisements that appear throughout the games present a society that had answered the anxiety of impending catastrophe with the products that Vault-Tec sold. Optimism as merchandise, safety as a commodity, survival as something you purchased. Vault-Tec's ability to conduct the Vault experiments at all depended on conditions that the pre-war world had created. A society in which a corporation could approach a government at the highest levels and propose running secret experiments on the people those shelters were supposed to protect and receive not just permission but active cooperation, is a society in which institutional accountability had already failed long before the bombs fell. The vaults are not an aberration in the Fallout universe's pre-war history. They are its culmination. Everything that made them possible had been building for decades before the first vault door sealed. The Vault Boy's permanent smile is an accurate representation of the sensibility that made the Vault program possible. Not malice but cheerfulness. Not cruelty, but the bureaucratic tidiness of people who had decided that the numbers in their reports were more real than the people those numbers represented. The Vault Boy smiles because in the world that built the vaults, this is what success looked like. Optimism as default, data as virtue, survival as product, and the people inside the vaults, none of whom had agreed to the experiments they were subjected to, living out the specific futures that the cheerful presentation had sold them. 200 years later, the Vault Boy is still on the billboards. The chime still plays. The advertising infrastructure of Vault-Tec's America survived the collapse of everything else, because it was built to survive, because making people feel safe was the product, and the product was good enough to outlast the civilization that created it. The vaults are still there. Some of them are inhabited. Most of them are ruins. All of them are records of a world that chose the experiment over the person again and again until there were no more people left to choose over. And then the wasteland began. Additional secrets. A final count, what 175 actually means. 175 is a specific number because specificity matters in a conversation about vault lore. Every vault has multiple secrets layered inside it, and the number 175 represents a genuine count of individual pieces of information about the vault system that are either hidden, overlooked, or underappreciated in general conversation about the Fallout franchise. Some of them are facts directly from game terminals, things that are technically present in the games, but that only appear if you read every document in a room that most players sprint through looking for enemies and loot. Some of them are implications drawn from the available evidence, connections between pieces of information that the games themselves do not make explicit but that the evidence supports. Some of them are observations about design decisions, the way the vaults are structured as physical environments, the way the aesthetic choices serve the narrative, the way the music and lighting and sound design of vault exploration communicate meaning before a single word is read. And some of them are questions. The vaults raise questions that do not have definitive answers, and those questions are part of what makes them such durable subjects for the kind of slow, careful, unhurried examination that a video like this one represents. The thing about Fallout Vault lore is that it rewards patience in a specific way. The secrets are all there. They are not hidden behind paywalls or locked behind difficulty requirements. They are written on terminals. They are recorded on holotapes. They are implied by the arrangement of furniture and the distribution of skeletons. They are available to anyone who is willing to slow down enough to read the room. The Vault system is one of the great exercises in world building and gaming history precisely because of this accessibility. Everything you need to understand what happened is in the world. The game does not summarize it for you. It does not highlight the important parts. It puts the evidence in the space and trusts you to be curious enough to find it. And if you have made it this far through 175 Vault secrets delivered one by one, you are clearly exactly that kind of curious. The door is open. The world is out there. There is always more to find. Additional secrets. The Vault residents as individuals' portraits in the dark. One of the most deliberate and important choices the Fallout games make is to give individual names, histories, and personalities to people who could have simply remained anonymous members of experimental populations. The Vaults would be disturbing enough as abstract accounts of institutional cruelty. They become something else when you can read the name of a specific person who was there. In Vault 11, Catherine Stone is the overseer who deliberately ran for the position she knew would mark her for sacrifice in order to abolish the system that had been consuming her community. Her campaign, her election, and the coup that followed are documented through records that survive her. She understood exactly what she was walking into. The choice she made had nothing to do with a hope of personal survival. It was a moral calculation about what her death might accomplish, and the tragedy of its outcome does not diminish the calculation. The coup happened. The Vault was destroyed by it. But the system that had killed someone every year for generations was also ended by it. Catherine Stone chose to spend herself on a specific outcome. The records are her evidence that the choice was real. In Vault 92, among the musicians who entered the facility, there was a violinist named Philip Greed, whose personal logs are available in one section of the vault. His early entries describe the excitement of the facility, the quality of the instruments, the pleasure of being surrounded by other serious musicians who had no financial pressures and no professional obligations. He writes about practicing for 8 hours without stopping because he finally could. He writes about a conversation with a cellist he found interesting. He writes about how quiet the underground is in a way that surprised him at first, and then became the specific quality of silence he wanted for the rest of his life. His later entries are a different kind of document entirely. In Vault 95, a man named Mitchell formally committed to his recovery on the day the vault sealed, writing in his journal that he understood this was probably the last time in his life he would have access to Jet, and that he was going to use the separation as a beginning rather than an ending. He maintained detailed records of his recovery for the following years. When the embedded agent revealed the stash, Mitchell's last journal entry is 17 pages long, not chaotic. Careful, he wrote out the entire history of his recovery in the hours between the revelation and the relapse, as though he wanted a record to exist of how much he had built before it was taken apart. In Vault 106, the logs make reference to a resident named Dr. Chen, who attempted to document the progression of the psychoactive effects in the air supply before she was overcome by them herself. Her early clinical notes describe the symptoms she is observing in other residents with professional detachment. Her later notes describe the symptoms in herself with diminishing coherence. The progression from observer to subject is tracked across maybe 40 entries, each one slightly less organized than the last. Her final entry is a single sentence, which may or may not be the last thought she completed before the drug environment became her reality permanently. In Vault 81, a young Vault resident named Bobby DeLuca discovered one of the hidden entrance points to the secret science wing and used it as a stash location for his own private drug supply. The game presents this as a plot element that triggers the hole-in-the-wall quest. What the game does not foreground is the implication that Bobby, navigating the walls of a vault he had grown up in and finding a sealed door, made the decision to use that space for something private rather than reporting it to vault authorities. His decision to maintain a private space in a facility designed around communal oversight and institutional trust is a small act of individual autonomy in a world that had been designed to minimize individual autonomy at every level. In Vault 51, among the early residents who voted for themselves in ZAX's first round of elections, there was a former state senator named Joel Chambers who had entered the vault with genuine beliefs about his qualifications for leadership. His wife, Elizabeth Chambers, initially supported his campaign. The holotapes document the point at which Elizabeth discovered that Joel had not been as forthright with her about certain aspects of his pre-war behavior as she had believed, and the specific mechanics of how that discovery changed their relationship inside the sealed vault form, one of the more intimate human stories in the broader chaos of Vault 51's history. ZAX observed this development with interest and used the information in subsequent calculations. In Vault 77, the Puppet Man's early logs before he opened the crate document a period of desperation that is genuinely painful to read. He had not been told he would be alone. He banged on the door for days. He filed formal complaints with the terminal's automated system and received automated acknowledgments. He made arguments for why the situation was wrong and why someone should correct it. He was articulate and persistent and completely helpless. The period before the puppets, when he was simply a person alone in a vault that had been designed to ensure he would be alone, is the foundation on which everything that followed was built. The puppets did not make him irrational. The isolation made him so desperate for connection that he found connection where connection was available, and the only available form was 4 figures made of cloth and felt. In Vault 87, the transformation process is documented from the perspective of the medical staff who were administering the FEV program. Some of them had been told what the vault was for. Others discovered the experimental parameters only after the vault sealed and the program began. The logs from the latter group are the ones worth reading because they describe the experience of a medical professional who had spent their career working to reduce suffering, confronting a mandate that required them to do the opposite. Some of them complied. Some of them attempted to refuse. The compliance and the refusal both left paper trails in the vault's documentation, and the paper trails do not tell you clearly which choice was better in the long run because neither one saved anyone. Additional secrets. The vault architecture as storytelling. The physical design of the vaults is itself a form of communication. Every vault follows the same broad template: the entrance tunnel, the overseer's office, the residential areas, the medical bay, the cafeteria, the reactor. But the specific way each vault has aged and changed tells you something about the specific story of the community that lived in it. A vault with clean, well-maintained corridors and intact lighting suggests a population that maintained functional order for an extended period. A vault with damaged walls, broken fixtures, and bodies in the hallways suggests that something happened violently enough to interrupt maintenance. A vault where one section is in perfect condition while another is completely destroyed suggests a split in the population or a specific event that concentrated damage in one area. Vault 101, when the player returns to it late in Fallout 3, is showing the first signs of the kind of social fracture that follows any revelation of institutional dishonesty. The corridors are the same, the systems are still functional, but the community dynamics have shifted in ways that are visible in how different residents position themselves in common spaces and how they respond to the player's presence. A vault in the process of discovering what it actually is looks different from one that still believes its own story. Vault 11 is entirely empty when the player arrives. The emptiness is specific. It is the emptiness of a place that was once full and then was not, rather than a place that was always quiet. The furniture is arranged as though people will return to use it. The election podium is still set up in the atrium. The sacrificial chamber is preserved in the state it was last used. The vault looks like it is waiting for something, and what it is waiting for, the 5 people who are going to decide whether to stay or go, is not coming back. Vault 112's Tranquility Lane is the most architecturally unusual vault space in the franchise because it does not look like a vault at all. It looks like a 1950s American suburb, complete with lawns and trees and houses and a sky that is bright blue in a way that underground spaces cannot naturally produce. The artificiality of the simulation is visible if you know what to look for. The sky has no clouds. The houses have no backsides. The children never age. But within the simulation's own logic, it is a complete and internally consistent environment, which is what makes Braun's extended inhabitation of it believable. He built something convincing enough to live in for 2 centuries. Vault 81's division between the civilian section and the hidden science wing is visible in the architecture once you know to look for it. The walls between the 2 sections are slightly thicker than necessary for structural reasons. The ventilation shafts that run between them are routed in ways that would only make sense if you needed them to carry materials between one space and another without using the main corridors. The hidden section's entrance, once found, reveals itself as something that was always there but was simply never connected to the civilian area's circulation pattern. The architecture is a physical record of the secrecy. Vault 22's overgrowth, when the player enters it in Fallout New Vegas, has transformed the standard vault architecture into something completely different. The plants have broken through walls and pushed up through floor grading. Roots have displaced structural elements in ways that should have compromised the integrity of the space but somehow have not. The vault looks simultaneously ruined and alive, its industrial precision replaced by organic chaos. The greenhouse vault became, accidentally, more like a greenhouse than it was ever designed to be. Vault 34's flooded lower levels create a specific visual atmosphere that the above-ground portions of the vault do not prepare you for. The water damage to the lighting and the electronics gives those areas a quality of murky, partial visibility that communicates the specific kind of environmental disaster that a reactor leak represents. The ghouls in the flooded sections move through the water in ways that are different from their movement on dry ground, and the combination of the water and the ghoulified former residents of the vault creates an atmosphere that the design team clearly worked hard to achieve. Walking through Vault 34's lower levels feels like entering a location where something permanent and irreversible occurred. Additional secrets. The long aftermath. What vault populations built. Beyond the immediate histories of what happened inside the vaults, the Fallout universe is full of the long-term consequences of vault histories propagating through post-war society in ways that the original experimental designs never anticipated. The New California Republic, the most significant political entity in the Western Fallout games, traces its ideological roots to vault populations. The NCR's foundational commitment to democracy, law, and the preservation of pre-war social institutions is a value system that came from people who lived through vault experiments and emerged with specific beliefs about what collective human institutions could and could not be trusted to do. The NCR is a vault population's answer to what should replace the kind of institutional authority that the vault overseers represented. The Boomers' expertise with explosives and their eventual acquisition of a flyable pre-war aircraft, the B-29 bomber that can be salvaged with the player's help in Fallout New Vegas, is the product of vault culture transmitted over generations. The people who left Vault 34 with weapons expertise passed that expertise to their children, who passed it further, until a community of extraordinary technical capability had built itself around a specific inheritance. The Boomers are a living demonstration of how a vault experiment's intended subject matter can be carried out of the vault and into the world in a form Vault-Tec never imagined. The fiends who destroyed Vault 3 in the Mojave are, themselves, a population defined by chem addiction and associated violence. The chem supply network that sustains them is partly built on production that occurs in the ruins of vault-adjacent facilities and former Vault-Tec supply chains. The fiends destroyed the control vault, and the control vault's destruction was partly a consequence of the wasteland conditions that the experimental vaults had helped produce. Control group destroyed by the experimental group's downstream effects. It is a grim irony built into the geography. The great cons of New Vegas carry a cultural memory of specific defeats and displacements that trace back, through generations, to the community that left Vault 15. Their identity as a raider gang is itself a vault legacy. The people who walked out of Vault 15 after its extended isolation produced a set of social fractures that became gang culture, and gang culture became an identity that has persisted for 2 centuries, far outlasting the specific circumstances that created it. The cons who appear in Fallout New Vegas do not know about Vault 15, but their entire cultural context is built on what that vault produced. The powder gangers who occupy Vault 19 in Fallout New Vegas are not from the vault. They moved in after the vault's original population scattered. But their occupation of a vault space, using its infrastructure for their own purposes, represents a common pattern in the Fallout universe. The vault infrastructure surviving the experiment and then being repurposed by whoever comes next. The vaults are extraordinarily well built. The communities they housed were fragile. The buildings outlast the people, and the people who come later inherit buildings whose history they may not know or may not care about. The synths of Fallout 4's Institute, who represent the most advanced artificial life the Fallout universe has produced, exist in a world that was partly shaped by the Vault experiments that preceded them. The Institute's own ethical framework around research and human subjects, the framework that allows them to create synthetic beings and conduct experiments without meaningful informed consent, sits in direct descent from the culture that made the Vault experiments possible. The pre-war corporate research culture that gave Vault-Tec permission to do what it did is the same culture that, in the Institute's case, survived underground and continued developing toward its own ends. Additional secrets: the sound of the vaults. One aspect of Vault storytelling that is easy to overlook when reading about the games rather than playing them is the sound design. The acoustic environment of a vault is a deliberate composition, and it communicates information about the space and its history before any visual or textual element does. The standard ambient sound of an inhabited vault is a specific combination of ventilation, hum, distant machinery, and the kind of fluorescent light flicker that was the background of every institutional space in the mid-20th century. This sound is reassuring in a specific way. It means the systems are working. It means the air is being filtered. It means someone or something is maintaining the infrastructure. When this sound is absent, when you enter a vault section where the machinery has stopped and the ventilation is silent, the absence registers immediately and viscerally. Vault 112's Tranquility Lane has a completely different acoustic environment than any standard vault space. It sounds like a suburb. Birds, wind in trees, the distant sound of a lawnmower that never gets closer. Children at play that you can hear but never quite locate. This ambient track was designed to feel off, to be recognizable as suburban quiet, but to have enough subtle wrongness that attentive players begin to question the environment before the narrative explicitly invites that questioning. The sound is too consistent. Real outdoor ambience has more variation. The Tranquility Lane sound is a loop, and if you listen long enough, you can hear where it repeats. Vault 22's ambient sound includes plant-related audio, the settling and shifting of root systems, the kind of deep, organic movement that plants make when growing at accelerated rates through materials that were not designed to accommodate them. This sound is not threatening in isolation, but paired with the visual of vines growing through walls and ceilings, it creates an atmosphere of something alive that is too large and too old for the space it is in, something that does not recognize the boundary between the constructed and the natural. Vault 92's audio design is built around the irony of its experimental premise. The vault that was supposed to celebrate music and used white noise to destroy its population has a musical ambient track that is itself slightly wrong. The pieces that play in different sections of the vault are fragments, incomplete pieces, melodies that do not resolve. The compositional incompleteness is an environmental translation of what the vault did to its population. It took people who were capable of creating complete, meaningful musical statements and produced in them something fragmented and unresolved. The Vault Boys' cheerful promotional jingles, playing from speakers that have been running for 200 years in many vault locations, are perhaps the most disturbing sound element in the entire franchise. They are technically functional. They are serving their intended purpose. They are playing to populations of dead people, to empty corridors, to the stale air of sealed spaces where everyone who was supposed to hear them is long gone. The jingles are not aware of this. They play on schedule, upbeat and confident, advertising a product whose value proposition has been definitively settled. Final thoughts. What staying with the vaults gives you? There is a specific quality of knowledge that comes from spending extended time with the vault system of the Fallout universe. It is not the knowledge you would get from reading a summary or from watching highlights of the most dramatic vault moments, or from playing through the major quest lines that happen to pass through vault environments. It is the knowledge that comes from slowing down inside a dark, sealed space and reading every document that the space contains. The knowledge that comes from understanding not just what happened, but why, in the specific sense that you can trace decisions through the evidence they left behind. The knowledge that comes from seeing the individual human beings inside the institutions, not just the institutions themselves. The Vault system is a study in institutional betrayal. It is also a study in individual resistance to institutional betrayal. It is a study in what communities do under pressure. It is a study in how knowledge, specifically the knowledge of what is actually happening to you, changes the experience of being in a situation. It is a study in the gap between what is promised and what is delivered. It is a study in what survives and what does not, and why. These are not simple topics. They do not have simple answers in the Fallout universe, and they do not have simple answers in any other context where they arise. What the Vault system does is give them a specific, vivid, detailed form. You can walk through them. You can read the evidence they left. You can trace the individual choices that produce the collective outcomes. You can know, in a specific and grounded way, what happened here and to whom. That knowledge is the opposite of what Vault-Tec intended. They built systems of deception, systems designed to keep the people inside ignorant of their actual situation. The games built over their ruins contain all the information those deceptions concealed. The logs are readable. The tapes are findable. The architecture is interpretable. The vaults were designed to hide the truth from the people inside them. 200 years later, the truth is available to anyone who takes the time to look. 175 secrets later, you have looked. And whatever the Vault-Tec chime plays on its endless loop in the empty corridors of the abandoned vaults, the truth is louder. It always was. It was there in the terminal logs and the holotapes and the architecture and the silence. It was waiting, the way truth always waits, for someone to take the time to find it. The door is open. The world is waiting.